It's 9 o'clock. It's 9 o'clock and time for the Tuesday, December 11th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County. We're going to begin with an invocation, which will be by Dr. Randy Fulton of Glendale Baptist Church. That'll be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Commissioner Peter O'Brien. And just before the invocation, we'll have a moment of silence for our first responders. Please rise.
Dear Heavenly Father, as we come to you today in this moment of silence, indeed we want to thank you so much for the gifts that you give us every single day. We thank you for our first responders. We thank you for the people who, when others run away from things, they run toward that because they are our protectors and our defenders. We thank you, Father, for these men and women that you have called into that line of duty, and some who even have paid the ultimate sacrifice with their life. We thank you, Father, for this day and this meeting of the county commissioners. We ask, Lord, that you would just bless this. We ask that you would lift up Indian River County and that you would just help us, Father, to follow you and to do your will. We thank you for the men and women who have sacrificed to give their time to serve, not just on the county commission, but also the men and women in this room who work for the county. We thank you, Father, so much for what they do. Most of all, Lord, we thank you for this time of the year. This is the time of the year when we have to stop and think about the greatest gift, and that's Christ Jesus. Thank you so much for sending him. Bless this meeting. Fill the people with wisdom. And Lord, we ask and pray that your will be done. For it is in the name of Christ we ask these things. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fulton, for that prayer.
Thank you, Doc.
We'll move to additions and deletions to the agenda. I've got a couple changes, if I may. One is Commissioner O'Brien. You have a matter under your matters which is related to a presentation. Would you like to move that up to follow 5C?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, please. Thank you.
And I would like to move my 14A up to just after the staff report of 12A1. And in light of the schedule that the city mayor has, preparing for the great signatures next Monday, I was wondering if we can move 13B related to the sale of Vero Electric to just before 10B public discussion. Any other changes, additions, or deletions?
Approve as amended.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Flesher, second by Commissioner Zork. Thank you very much. Moving on to, you want to vote for this? This is such a collegial body that
Aye.
It's the season.
yes, no discord here for at least the rest of the month. We move to proclamations and presentations, and I'm happy to say that we're going to begin with a presentation of a proclamation honoring David W. Fleetwood on his retirement from Indian River County Board of County Commissioners. And Mr. Fleetwood is in the audience, and he's going to have to come up and step up to the podium. And it looks like that might be his wife or daughter there, so if she'd like to come up. She's not going to come up, so she's as shy as you.
Yes, she is. She's coming.
Yeah, I see some people that are probably here for the proclamation, and you all don't be shy like David. If you want to come on up and surround him, you're more than welcome to. David gives the look, and they suddenly come up. That's good.
He still has it.
He does. Yes. For another 20 days, they're going to pay attention to him.
This is just a few that can show up.
With that, I'm very happy to read this proclamation honoring David W. Fleetwood on his retirement from Indian River County Board of County Commissioners, Department of General Services, Parks Division. Whereas David W. Fleetwood has announced his retirement from the Parks Division and Indian River County Board of County Commissioners effective December 31st, 2018. And whereas David W. Fleetwood, following his retirement from the United States Air Force, began his career with Indian River County on February 18, 2000 with Public Works as the County Projects Inspections Manager in Engineering. On January 4, 2002, he was promoted to Parks Division Assistant Superintendent and began his endeavor with the Parks Division. On June 8, 2007, he was acting superintendent for the Parks Division until he was once again promoted and became the official superintendent on February 8, 2008, where he has served in this capacity until his retirement. And whereas David W. Fleetwood has served Indian River County and our patrons with distinction and selflessness. During his 19 years of service, he has upheld his duties to the highest regard, and his dedication was highly commendable. His can-do attitude inspired the Parks Division to routinely go above and beyond the call of duty. His work was greatly appreciated by his employer, citizens, and co-workers alike. And now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the Board applauds the tremendous efforts of David W. Fleetwood on behalf of the county, and the Board wishes to express their appreciation for his dedication and exemplary service he has given to Indian River County for the last 19 years. And be it further proclaimed that the Board of County Commissioners and staff extend heartfelt wishes for success in his future endeavors. Adopted this 11th day of 2018. David, before you begin and give us a long speech, I will say I had a great opportunity to see you and your department at work just last Saturday night at the Jake Owen concert. And for me as a county commissioner, that was great. You had a whole staff, both yours and the event staff, that did a tremendous job. Everything was flawless. I got to walk around with Jackie looking good while all the work was done by other people. And that is one of the great things about being a commissioner of Indian River County, is the great staff, which actually makes things run so smoothly, so well, just day after day. And again, making our job, I think, look very, very easy. So I'll use that as an example of just commending you and your service. You've done great work for us over the years, and the board is very appreciative. And now, I know you have a long speech before, so I'll shut up and
A real short one here. These are the guys I want to thank right here. They do all the work, and I couldn't ask for a better crew. We've had some retire over the years. Those guys were good, but these guys right here, it doesn't matter what it is. They don't question anything. They just do it, and they do a good job. And I appreciate that. I'd like to thank Jim Davis and Chris Kafer for taking a chance on me in February of 2000. So Chris Kafer interviewed me and asked me why I wanted to work for Indian River County. I said, well, I've only had one other job, and that was in the Air Force. And I don't want but one more. And I'm lucky I've had it. So I've enjoyed all of my time here, loved the work, and what I'll miss is the people more than anything else. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, or go ahead, Commissioner Flex, go ahead.
David, these are always bittersweet moments as we're sending somebody off to their retirement. Hopefully it's not too far, and hopefully you stick around and visit us. But this one's an emotional one for me. You've been there through the thick and thin, and your response has always been, my crew can do it. He spoke all about all of you. My crew can do it, not I can do it, I can get it done. It never was I, it was always about my crew. And I truly appreciate that and the fact that it got done. You've done some amazing things here during your tenure. I think that your Air Force experience, your commitment to the United States military has most certainly revealed itself in your work. I just want to point out one thing, that just a couple of years ago, I think you were going through some surgery, and you made a commitment to some individuals that you were going to get a job done. And when I saw you get there in a walker, I said, this guy has got some level of commitment. and then the team came with you, and that was for our firefighters at that turkey thing. And I just could not believe, and I know that you were wincing in pain, but you did it because you committed yourself. And that's the type of level of commitment and example we need in the leadership in this government. So I hope that she who replaces you has that same mantra, because they deserve it, and the people of Indian River County deserve it. And I think a big chunk's leaving us, so come on back when you can. We know where you are, too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Yep. The thing that struck me most about the work David and his team do is just the consistency. Year in, year out, it doesn't matter what park, what field it is. When you go there, it's immaculate. And I think there's never been a time where I've ever been disappointed in our parks. They've always just been immaculate, well-kept, ready for the kids to go out there and play. And so, David, you and your team just did an awesome job for the county, and particularly for the kids in the county, I think, because they're the ones on those ball fields. And then with the naming we've done recently, the Victor Hart Field and the Joe Wiggins Field, those are just awesome events. I mean, just really well done. And so just thank you for everything you've done and your whole team. You've just done a great job. And it's things like that, like parks, are really the things that the citizens look at. They see it. They're on the fields. They're out there. And I don't think in 12 years I've gotten a single complaint about our parks. So I think that's a great testament to the work you and your team have done. So thank you for all your service, David. You'll be missed.
Thank you.
I just want to say that your crew is a testament and a reflection of your leadership and management style, and they are a great reflection of you and what you've accomplished. We're very appreciative of all the projects we've worked on together. Some have been more interesting than others, but each one has been very fun, and I've really enjoyed working with you. And I wish you all the luck in your retirement. I know a couple of parks that you might want to go hang out at now that you're unofficial, and I hope you enjoy those.
Thank you.
Commissioner Zorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to wish you and your family and your coworkers, you've had a good bond with these folks. You've worked together for a long time. You got a great team. There's a couple up there that are kind of, I'm not so sure about sometimes. No, I'm just kidding. I've gotten to know a couple of your folks real well. The pride that you've instilled in them in getting their job done and making it look good for the public speaks for itself with, as Commissioner O'Brien said, this is an area where we don't get complaints on because it's always just done top-notch by your guys and gals. I want to stress that the guys and gals in the department. But enjoy your last few days there. Kind of go around and look at what these parks look like, what you've turned them into over the years, and then take some time to enjoy yourself. And then if you'd like to be on a committee assignment, we're sure we can work out something for you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like to say thank you to David. The Jake Owen concert Saturday night, David is the guy who would be there alongside the crew, working until the end of the event, whether it's 10:30, 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, to get things wrapped up. And then he's there maybe to open something up at 6 o'clock the next morning. The amount of time and commitment that he's put in is really amazing, and it's because of the commitment that he has to parks and the pride that he shares. And that pride shows in the quality of the parks, shows in all of the whole crew there. That whole crew, David said it's the crew, and the crew is great. The crew is inspired by David's actions because they see him there doing it. He's lived and breathed parks for his entire time here, and that commitment shows, and it's greatly appreciated. And thank you for your service, David.
Thank you, Jason.
Mr. Zito. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I had all those remarks prepared for David's honor today, but to hear it come from the leadership, those who are have such a tremendous responsibility to run all the affairs of the county and have them celebrate you and have that much knowledge about what you do every day. It's really a testament to the county. and you're part of what makes the county great, David. If you'll indulge me a moment, a day in the life of David Fleetwood. I happened to come across an email dated April 27th of this year. It's not uncommon. It's dated, timed at 4:43 p.m., which, as you know, David was the first one at the shop every morning at 6:30 a.m. to greet the crew and motivate them, give them their general orders, and would not be uncommon for him to be at his desk answering emails at this hour. This is one that came in from a citizen that was asking about leaving a trailer overnight at Wabasso Park. So David takes the time to respond and writes a very lengthy response and sincere response, and I think it embodies his commitment. First, he goes on to explain that we have an ordinance that prevents that, gives him the details, but it wasn't just a no, you can't leave your boat there. It was, here are some other county facilities. He mentions Donald McDonald Campground, he gives the coordinates, he mentions Round Island and Blue Cypress, and then he goes on to say, which he does not have to do, fishing at Blue Cypress Lake is some of the best anywhere in Florida. Guided tours are available, and skiffs and pontoon boats are also available. You may also leave a vehicle with trailer for boating in the Indian River. At Round Island Riverside Park, gives the address. Please visit the county's website, see all the great things our county has to offer. And if you have any questions, please call me, personal cell phone number, and we'll be happy to assist you in any way we can. And that's David's legacy. We will be happy to assist you in any way we can. And David, I'm so proud of that work ethic and your commitment and going the extra mile. I know this is bittersweet. I caught you in a moment at the show the other night. I could see you surveying the fairgrounds in all its glory, and I could tell it was a tough time for you. But better things ahead, and your legacy is strong. So enjoy retirement. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let Dave, Mr. and Ms. Fleetwood come up here, and then the rest of y'all get up.
But you got a list.
I do.
Yeah, you get a lot done around the house.
I'm
now.
sorry, David.
Nice to meet you. Come on up here.
Jackie sent some short prints. Oh, very good. Looks like there might be one for each member of the crew. Get the whole crew. You hold the proclamation if you would. And they like him.
Y'all might need to double up, get a couple of guys in the front.
Get the short ones.
There's not too many short ones. They're growing big there.
Okay, everybody on three. 1, 2, 3. We'll do one more. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Son of a gun. How you doing? All right. Good to see everybody.
Hey, just so y'all know, David has cookies.
Yeah, but we need chicken.
Oh, whoa! You lose it. Stay bulky.
2:30 in the morning.
Hanging out backstage.
Thank you. So much.
All right, David.
Thank you. You too.
And we'll now move to a proclamation honoring Judge Joe A. Wild. Judge, your family would like to come up to the podium?
Kind of feel like I'm following Vince Lombardi here. Yeah, tough act.
Judge, welcome, and thank you very much for your service to our community. It's great to have you here today, and I am very happy to read this proclamation honoring Judge Joe A. Wild. Whereas Judge Joe A. Wild served as county judge from 1989 to 2018, and whereas Judge Wild was first elected in 1988 and has presided over courtrooms for 30 years. Prior to his election, he served as Assistant State Attorney in Tallahassee for 2 years and Vero Beach for 7 years. And whereas Judge Wild graduated Vero Beach High School in 1974, Catawba College in 1978, and Florida State University Law School in 1980. He has been married to Glenda Brackett Wild for 36 years, and they have 5 children. And whereas Judge Wild has served the community in many ways, as a high school sports official, as chairman of Character Counts Coalition of Indian River County, and as elder with the Vero Beach Church of Christ. Additionally, he has served as president of the Board of Education Foundation and as a board member at both Harding University in Searcy, Arkansas, as well as Mount Dora Children's Home in Mount Dora, Florida. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners, Indian River County, Florida, that the board expresses its deep appreciation for the services Judge Wild has provided to better our community and wishes him continued success in his future endeavors. Adopted this 11th day of December 2018 and signed by all 5 members of the Board of County Commissioners. And Judge, before you speak to us, I'd like to thank you for your service. It's one of the things that is incredibly important is in a democracy is the rule of law, and the rule of law seems to operate more or less seamlessly on a day-to-day basis, but judges are necessary to keep things within the right tracks. And it's clear that that job often is not easy. You're often forced to do things you'd rather not do and address issues that you'd rather not be addressing. But for our community, they need to be done. So thank you very much for providing that difficult service for us.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to give us a few words?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's been a blessing, serving as a county judge here in this county. And I think, listening to Mr. Fleetwood's, all the things you said about him and all that he's done for our county is just a perfect reflection of just all the things that go into making this county a great place to live. And so I've been blessed to be able to work and live here in this community, but you look around here and it's all a team effort. Now Mr. Fleetwood has a bunch of employees. I've got one, Carla here. But it was just not possible with all the other, it was necessary for all the other folks that have been involved in the judicial system. Starting with you all, with the great building you give us and the facilities and things like that, make it work. Y'all always do a first-class job, so when you come into that courthouse, you think you're in a courthouse. You go to some places, you think you're in the Soviet Union or something with the way it looks, but you have that kind of thing. I'm really pleased to see 2 of the elected officials here that impact the job I do the most and have helped me do the most. Clerk of the Court, Jeff Smith, and Sheriff Darrell Lohr. Where's the sheriff? Back there. These guys have employees that have made it easy to do a good job, And so I appreciate the honor you give me, but really the honor goes to all the people who worked in this county in supporting the things that we do. I think Mr. Solari's right. One of the things that makes us a great country is the rule of law. And so we need to have judges that are supported and encouraged, and you all always do that. And I'm sure Judge Menz is going to carry on that tradition. This is a great county to work in, and so I'm sure you'll all give her the same support that I've gotten. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of my employees, they've loved working with Joe Wild all these years. When you have employees, clerks that speak highly of a judge and his performance and his character, his personal faith, that speaks volumes. And we're going to miss Judge Wild tremendously. I've had the honor of working with him as clerk for the last 6.5 years, but before that in the office. I also had the honor of having his daughter work for us, who is right here, Kristen. I would love to have the honor to have her back with us, but she's going on to bigger and better things. But we really are going to miss Judge Wild. He is a pillar of the community, his name goes without saying, and I just want to give him my blessing and my thanks for everything you've done for us. He's so easy to work for and to, work with, and that's what's made the system work so well, is we were able to work so highly and so good efficiently with him. And I just want to give him my personal wishes for a great retirement, and your family as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and probably my first remark is for Kristen and your siblings. I had 3 boys that grew up while I was an elected official here in the county, and I know they were always put under a little bit more expectations. Well, you have to behave because your father is this. And I imagine it's probably worse being the daughter of a judge, because you're really held to a high bar. And I know that at times other kids, may give you a hard time, and you should just know, you and your siblings, that your father was a man of honor and respect, and no matter how difficult it might have been growing up under that, you should be thankful that you had that opportunity to have a man like Judge Wild to be your father. But the other thing I wanted to comment on was when I was on the canvassing board, and normally you have a judge, a county commissioner, and the supervisor of elections, but Kay Clem was an election challenge, so we actually had Judge Morgan, and Judge Wild was our, chairman of the canvassing board. And this was the year we had a runoff and a recount and all kinds of issues like that. And just Judge Wild's leadership during that whole process was very impressive, getting through the scrutiny of a recount and the press and the pressure and all that going on, and just the leadership he showed. And the thing I got out of all that was, our system really works, that we do have a good election system because people like Judge Wild were on the canvassing board making sure that the laws were followed. And then the other most impressive thing was the night of the election, when the polling workers were bringing the reports, and these poor folks, their count might have been off by like one number, so they had signed for 200 ballots, but they only had 199. And these folks came in almost petrified because they thought they were going to get arrested or some kind of issue. And Judge Wild would sit down with them and just very calmly walk them through, just get the facts, say, okay, that you're fine. And they would go, what, really? So just the way Judge handled that was really impressive and put those folks at ease. So, Judge, it was an honor to serve with you on that canvassing board. And thank you for everything else you've done for the community. We'll miss you, but I think you're right. I think Judge Menz will do a good job as well. We'll look forward to working with her, but thank you for your service. It's greatly appreciated.
Commissioner Fletcher.
Your Honor.
I can't do anything about your speeding ticket.
Your Honor, I know you tried, too, and thank you for that. But I just wanted to say that in my years of service, I never had the opportunity to have a case before you. And I think you're the only judge that I did not have that opportunity. And I don't know whether it was quality police work or the fear of the Honorable Judge Joe Wild. But whatever it was, I did not have the opportunity in the courtroom, but watched you in the courtroom, and I was awed. And I want to thank you for your service, and thank you for your service on the field as a referee, and just watching you giving back, a unique experience because customarily judges live a life of near obscurity for obvious reasons and do not meld in with the community as much as you did, because it's limitations and associations, as we talked, and you did not let that barrier interfere with you giving back to the community, giving back to the youth, giving back to the people that you know and love and care about. And I hope that continues. Commissioner O'Brien mentioned the canvassing board. That's probably my most memorable moments. I'm saddened by the fact that we won't have the opportunity to work at the canvassing board together because, again, we did not have critical issues where it was down to one vote, but we had a lot of signature questions. And I enjoyed those moments with you, and thank you for your service, and I wish you the best with the honey-do list and catching up with the kids and doing the things that you love the most.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Honor.
Want your picture, Judge, or? Yeah, come on, get right here in the middle.
You can have pictures now.
Yeah, have your daughter and everybody come on up.
We now move to a presentation of Why Tobacco-Free Parks by Guinevere Presti with students working against Tobacco Club at Sebastian River Middle School. Come on up. Welcome.
Good morning. This is Genevieve Presti, and she is from SWAT on Sebastian's Middle School. I'll let her take over.
Okay, so why tobacco-free parks? So we don't want to smell the smoke from other people's smoking because secondhand smoke is actually worse than like regular smoking, the actual smoker. Vaping too. Secondhand smoking, like I said before, is really bad for you, and nobody wants to smell it, whether it's children or animals. They can't talk, but we already know they don't want to smell it. And adults definitely don't want to smell it. Same thing with vaping. Most people think that that vaping is water vapor. They say, oh, it's the healthier alternative, but it's actually not. It's not just water vapor. There's all different types of things in it. There's aerosols, there's cancer-causing chemicals, there's many different horrible different chemicals in it. So there's a lot of littering that has to do with smoking because, you know, what do you usually see when you're doing a cleanup or when you're just walking around and you see littering? It's usually cigarette butts. So I actually did a cleanup a little while ago, and just in a small, really small area, me and my friends collected more than 600 cigarette butts in just a small area. So that's quite a few. 4.5 trillion cigarette butts are littered each year. And cigarette butts are the #1 littered item on beaches and roads. And just a few cigarette butts could still be incredibly damaging to our environment. So all of these animals, they're thinking that they're food because, I mean, a cigarette butt looks exactly like a French fry to a seagull. And so they're gonna pick it up and eat it as food. This is extremely damaging to their health. So what about the children? I mean, usually at parks there's children and animals, and they're both, I mean, the children are too young to understand what cigarette butts are, and they don't really understand yet that they're dangerous. Like, you can't start telling a child about all the negative effects about tobacco. They're not gonna understand that. They just think of it as a toy, and we can't have that. Here's some interesting, not so interesting, they're like bad facts about smoking. So they're like the most littered item that you usually find is cigarette butts. There was 1,030,640 cigarette butts found on US beaches and island waterways. Broken discarded jewel pods have been found all over the beaches, especially in a coastal cleanup at South Beach. So there's no safe level of smoke or aerosol. There's no real good thing to it. There's never going to be a better option. So we could either have a resolution, an ordinance, or a written policy. Just something to tell these people that they can't be smoking next to animals and people and littering all over the parks. Thank you.
And thank you very much for your presentation. You may want to stay by the podium for a minute because Commissioner O'Brien has a related item. Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My item kind of refers to seeing if the board would like to direct the county attorney come back with an ordinance regulating smoking at county parks and such. Talking to Dylan, he indicated that the state has still kind of preempted us not only on inside smoking laws, but also on outside. And so our hands are tied there a little bit, but possibly if the board would consider giving the county attorney direction to come back with a resolution that would encourage people not to smoke in county parks and such. And then also talking with the county administrator that maybe one thing to help this would be to designate a couple of smoking areas at the beach parks that would have an appropriate cigarette butt, container where people could just walk over, stay in a localized area away from the other beachgoers, and then have a place to put their butts instead of discard on the beach and stuff. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and just see if the board would approve having the county attorney bring us back a resolution along those lines.
So it's long been our policy to basically try to move by education rather than the ordinance, but I think your suggestions fit pretty much well in that. We can have a resolution, I believe, that does focus on education and the dangers. I think that the butt containers are more than appropriate, and even some sections which may even include some anti-smoking, basically posters would be good. And if there's some way to get the presentation rolling on our TV or website, I think that would be appropriate. And if they came up with some other video that was short and sweet, that was basically a public service announcement that would run on the TV show, I think that would all be appropriate. So I'd be happy to have a motion with all of those things, but also before you make it, I'd like to see if there are any other comments.
Okay.
Well, I hate to suggest additional signage at the beach as well, but a small signs with the catchy phrase, please don't smoke, young lungs at work, something of that nature, recreation, whatever. I think we can come up with something very powerful and suggestive and catchy that I think people will adhere to. I mean, after all, people are at the beach for recreation, and they tend to be a little bit more respectful while being there. If not told, they don't know, and they do as they wish. So maybe perhaps a tacit direction could be placed there as well. I fully support having a resolution, and inclusive of that. I was thoroughly rewarded by the presentation that we all had by the young team, the ladies who put this together. It was absolutely incredible. And it also should most certainly include vaping as well, because after all, it took us 50 years to get the message about smoking, and vaping is fairly new. And I think we will find out more up the road. The producers of tobacco did a very good job of ensuring that we did not have all the facts, and I think that's happening with the vaping as well. We were at a beach cleanup, and I found a lot of those little cartridges or remnants of vaping skewed throughout. I see somebody that I was working with in the audience too. Yes, Marie. Hi. Thank you.
Commissioner Zork.
Yes, in support of the butt collectors at the park, the beach areas, but also when I've attended activities or ball games at South County Park or North County Park, where you have that long sidewalk, that sometimes the end of that sidewalk becomes the de facto smoking area of sorts, and having a collection method there, but also the signage, because with Chandler's always susceptible to respiratory issues, so we would always he'd hold his breath and go through the gauntlet so he didn't have to deal with the smoke. So any additional signage, and I think most people will adhere to those. You know, if they see something posted, they're gonna go somewhere else or refrain from doing it. So if we could look at some of those collectors at some of the parks where you have kind of a key entry area and a long walk, that might be a nice addition to have.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Brien.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion, and I hope I caught everybody's ideas here. One, a resolution that would encourage non-smoking at county parks and facilities. Two, the creation of some designated smoking areas with appropriate cigarette butt containers. Creation of some educational signs on the danger of smoking and vaping, and maybe the SWAT team can develop a short video for posting on the county website. I think that got everybody's points in the motion.
Second. Commissioner Fleischer seconds it. Anybody from the public wish to speak on this motion? Anybody from the public? Come on up. Name and address for the record, please.
Anybody?
Good morning, Board of Commissioners. Harry Howell, 765 Broadway Street, Vero Beach, Florida. Currently the mayor of the city of Vero Beach. Ms. Presti, thank you. You did a wonderful job. If I could ask, maybe we could work with your attorney and our attorney, maybe have something, either a joint resolution or just something that would create some continuity so that all the beaches have kind of the same message and work toward the same goal. I too think that it's terrible that we have all this trash, this litter that's created by these cigarette butts and would you call them jewels? So if we could work on that together, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
That is your motion,
I'm very fine to amend my motion to include cooperation with the city of Vero Beach to provide a unified position.
And the second agrees. Anybody else from the public? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you very much, Ms. Presti.
Thank you.
Fine job.
Great job.
Very good, thank you. Thank you, commissioners.
Pleasure. Move on to the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of October 16th and October 23rd, 2018.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Fleischer, second by Commissioner O'Brien. Any comment, corrections, deletions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Information items. I'll just note that we have another retirement today from the Indian River County Public Works Department, the Road and Bridge Division, and it's Mr. Roger Walker, and I'd very much like to thank him for his 15 years of service to Indian River County. We also have committee assignments for the commissioners, so I invite every member of the public to go online, find out about those exciting committee assignments, and you may even want to join one of those committees. Move on to the consent agenda. Would anybody like to pull any item from the consent agenda? Would anybody from the public care to pull any item from the consent agenda? There being none,
Move approval.
we have a motion from Commissioner Fleischer,
Second.
second by Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 5-0. We moved 13B up to the, right before the public discussion items. Mr. Reinkel.
Thank you very much. In 2015, the school board, the city of Vero Beach, and Indian River County entered into a revised fiber optic interlocal agreement, which governed how the three parties were going to share fiber optic resources and infrastructure within Indian River County. As the board is aware, on December 17th, FPL is scheduled to close on the city of Vero Beach electric utility system. As part of the sale, FPL needs to resolve several issues relating to the fiber utilized by the three local governments. The parties have negotiated 3 separate agreements relating to the fiber resources. The first is a substation agreement. Under the substation agreement, FPL will pay to remove the communications equipment from the substations, which will no longer be owned by the city of Vero Beach. As FPL is transitioning the equipment out of the substations, the parties will still have access to the substations for required work and also for 2 additional free trips per month. The second contract is a pole attachment agreement. What are now City of Vero Beach poles will now become FPL poles. and the three parties will not pay for any attachment fees to these poles for 5 years. Now, during the 5-year period, Public Works will be working on transitioning our system off many of these poles. And then after 5 years, the parties will pay $16.93 per distribution pole, $104.06 per transmission pole, and $208.12 per attachment in the hot zone. These fees will be subject to annual adjustments. And then the third agreement with FPL is the fiber license agreement, in which FPL will be leasing fiber from the three parties in order to assist in operation of their electric system. FPL will be paying up to $23,847 per month for leasing 44 fiber strands from the parties. Finally, the three parties, or the three local governments, will enter into an amendment to the fiber optic ILA, which clarifies the responsibility of the parties relating to the pole attachment fees. County Attorney's Office recommends that the board approve the 4 agreements and authorize the chair to execute them. Additionally, the County Attorney's Office also recommends that the board authorize the county attorney to make non-substantive changes prior to execution. Please keep in mind that these agreements are part of a much larger overall sale and transition, and thus there may be small changes that need to be made to these agreements and other agreements before they're finalized, and thus I just asked for that additional request. Finally, I would just really like to thank Rich Spirica and Manny Cabo. They have both worked very hard in constantly reviewing these documents, helping me understand the technical issues relating to these our fiber optic system and how they relate to the consortium agreement and the overall FPL sale. So I just want to thank Rich and Manny publicly for all their assistance in this. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rangel, I'd like to thank you also, as well as Mr. Spirica and Mr. Cabot. This was one of those somewhat last-minute items, but one which was very important and needed to get done, and you got it done, I think, very well for Indian River County. And so I want to thank you and Rich and all those who worked on this. Any questions for Mr. Rangel?
Just one,
Mr.
Dylan,
Rangel.
and any changes you need to make in the future, and to help make this go forward, to help make the sale go forward. If the city would like to deed over the Dodgertown Golf Course to the county as part of these documents, I think that would be an appropriate change. Mayor Howell.
Helpful.
I think that's actually already in the substation agreement. I didn't really want to talk about that
Okay, all
issue,
right,
but
good.
I think we've already got that.
We did move this up. No talking from the audience. If you want to speak, come to the dais, please. I will, since we moved this up to help the city of Vero Beach, I'd be happy to have any comments. If there are none, I'll ask if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak on this issue. There be none. Commissioners?
Move staff recommendation.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Zork, second by Commissioner Flesher. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next up is a public discussion item, a request to speak from Leonard Kaczynski regarding FS Chapter 617 corporations. Good morning. Before you begin, I just want to note that my understanding is this is not something that we can vote on, so I'm just hoping that you'll keep it sort of short and sweet.
Short and sweet.
And great. And your name and address for the record, please.
I'm Leonard Kaczynski. I live at the Lakes of Sandridge, at 6036 Ridge Lake Circle, Vero Beach, Florida, 32967. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, staff, for all your assistance. And thank you, community, for paying attention today. If you live in a homeowner association or you plan to live in a homeowners association, you should know about these statutes, Chapter 617, Corporations and Not-for-Profit. I'm going to start with a little homeowners association humor. How does the homeowners board of directors president inform tenants there is a homeowners association annual election board of director meeting? Tenants are not members and found on the homeowners association roster. 617, the corporation's not-for-profit 01401. I'm going to be providing a bunch of statutes today. The situation is that the governing agencies that enforce this are backlogged. These are the governing agencies that are protecting your family and your home, your largest investment. As you can see, these corporations, homeowners associations, are for members, members only. The bylaws must be consistent with the provisions of this chapter. Also, any provision with respect to the relative rights or interests of the members as among themselves or in the property of the corporation. So that's how the articles of incorporations are developed when a homeowners association first begins its process to pass it on to its members. The bylaws, very important. It's basically a contract between the homeowner and the homeowners association. It pretty much supersedes everything on the face, but we'll get to it actually, the supremacy of law actually rules out. The bylaws cannot be inconsistent with laws or articles of the corporation. They must be consistent to the rule. They cannot be inconsistent. As once again, corporations not-for-profit are for members, and the way you know they're a member is that their membership book contains each name and address of the member. The meetings are for members, the meetings of are the members, and the members are entitled to vote and also receive notice that there will be a meeting of a vote. The qualification of the board of directors who are running the homeowners associations are regulated by 617, as you can see. The corporation is regulated by Chapter 720, which pertains to homeowners associations. Membership in such a corporation is required pursuant to any documents recorded in the county property record. And the reason that I highlighted that is because a lot of the administrative functions of a homeowners association, those agencies do not have enforceable ways of enforcing that these are correct and that they are consistent with the bylaws and the corporation's not-for-profit. As you can see, there's the business professional regulation, general provisions. As I said, they're about 6 months backlogged with pertaining to addressing any issues to protect your family and home. Some of the highlights are intentionally violating any rule adopted by the board of the Florida statutes or are inappropriate. Also failing to report to the department any person who the licensee knows is in violation of this chapter and a chapter regulating the alleged violation or the rules of the department and the board. And also, the business and professional regulation doesn't like individuals employing a trick or a scheme to try and compromise home ownership. Once again, as I said with our little homeowners association in the beginning, you have to have a stake in the homeowners association. You have to be, it's mandated, it's to protect your family in law. You have to have members only. And a lot of outdated documents contain number 10. They omit the "and" includes any person or entity obligated by the government documents to pay an assessment or amendment fee. There's thousands of homeowners associations in the state of Florida. There's a large percentage of them that do not contain that. That's why you have individuals that are running corporations that don't have a stake in the corporation. And 720, we get to, which is the Homeowners Association chapter. Any director or officer of an association or willingly, knowingly fails to comply with these provisions. So we really want to have the boards of directors who are responsible for overseeing the homeowners associations willfully doing the right thing, not avoiding those provisions. And the bylaws shall be for the parcel owners and members only. And as you've seen, though I had a little joke. So we have a little thing from the founder of the Association Law Group in Miami Beach, which I talked about, the supremacy clause. You need to follow the current law. Make sure that your bylaws are up to date, your documents are up to date. Outdated documents can be a serious problem for a number of reasons. They may not have the ability to use legislative remedies enacted over there, leaving the homeowner and his family at a disadvantage. There's a remedy to this. 617 provides that remedy. Filing requirements, you can correct a file document. If your bylaws are false, misleading, or contain fraudulent information, or they contain an incorrect statement, you can correct that, and you should correct it. That is, the rule is that you should protect that. Don't rely on language found in other homeowners associations. address all foreseeable scenarios. It's very important when you're looking at your documents, and the corporation not-for-profit 617 gives you the opportunity to know what all the foreseeable scenarios might be. Make sure that you're addressing them. Go to your homeowners association meetings, and that's a very important part of is attending your homeowners association. Get involved in your community. Get involved in your homeowners associations. Have a technical expert review, inform your documents and the integrity to the homeowners board of directors. A lot of these homeowners association documents are weak. They need to be updated, or you're going to get caught suing yourself. Also, don't forget about, don't forget about any changes that you make to this exempt bylaws and corporations. They have to be communicated to the IRS. So make sure that you have the complete flow there. If you have any questions or comments, feel welcome at this time. If you see something, do something. But remember, protect your largest investment. It's where your family goes home at night. Thank you. Did anyone have any questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We move on to public notice items. There are two notice for two public hearings, and I'll ask Mr. Reingold to read them.
Thank you very much. The Board of County Commissioners will have two public hearings on Tuesday, December 18th, 2018 at 9:05 a.m. First is an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, amending Section 201.08 Rates and Charges of Chapter 201 County Water and Sewer Services of the Code of Indian River County, establishing an amnesty program relating to delinquency charges on certain utility service availability charges, making findings and providing for severability, codification, and an effective date. The second public hearing, also scheduled for December 18th, will be an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, amending Section 201.09 impact fees of Part 1 in general of Chapter 201 County Water and Sewer Services of the Code of Indian River County, Florida, in order to allow for a refund of water and sewer impacts under certain circumstances and providing for codification, severability, repeal of conflicting provisions, and also an effective date. And with that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reingold. We move on to departmental matters. The first up is community development, a follow-up on the request by Kim Gilbert to waive impact fees for a child care facility located in the city of Vero Beach. Good morning, Mr. Bowling.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, Stan Bowling, County Community Development Director. At your November 13th meeting, the board heard a request from Kim Gilbert, who's the owner of a child care facility located on 24th Street in the city of Vero Beach. The facility is on about 6/10 of an acre, over 6,400 square feet of total building area. And at the November 13th meeting, Ms. Gilbert requested that impact fees be waived. They're actually due when a previous owner many years ago converted the building in two phases from an adult living facility to a child care facility and went through part of the city's approval process, but never obtained building permits or paid impact fees. And at the November 13th meeting, the board directed staff to evaluate and report back to you all. That's what we're doing this morning. Also to coordinate with Ms. Gilbert and Commissioner Solari, which staff did. We also communicated with and coordinated with city planning staff. They've been very responsive just in terms of looking at processes for projects in the city of Vero Beach. So what we did, and this is reflected in your backup material, we updated the timeline. You all had sort of a cursory timeline back on November 13th. We added details, provided a flow chart for projects in the city and projects in the county just as a way of comparison, and so that you all would have that backup. And again, we've had some good communication with city staff, and actually have a change that occurred a few years ago that's in place, and we're adding a few things to try to keep the situation that has occurred from occurring again. And let me just summarize what our evaluation is, and that's that a previous owner applicant in 2002 and then in 2004 through the city of Vero Beach went through their site plan process to change the use of the building from an adult living facility to a child care facility. That intensified the use. The previous owner applicant was given instructions to come to the building department to get permits, to coordinate with county planning for concurrency and ultimately payment of impact fees. And that essentially did not happen. That previous owner applicant just didn't follow through on the rest of the process. A building was never contacted, county planning was never contacted, was not aware of it, and it never came up really through city code enforcement either, which is unusual, but it certainly seemed to have happened in this case. And so essentially impact fees were not paid at that time. And it wasn't until the current owner, Ms. Gilbert, came in to do the right thing and get a building permit for a deck expansion that the issue was uncovered of essentially that drop off in the process. And so the staff, and this was reported at your last meeting, worked with Ms. Gilbert and with city staff to kind of look at what the best case scenario would be to take advantage of the applicable credits. And the best case scenario is an impact fee liability of a little over $7,900 for the change of use. And also in evaluating the current ordinance that we have in place, and just a whole underpinning of impact fees, that impacts that occur have to be paid. We don't actually waive impact fees either for county projects or even affordable housing or anything like that. There's always a funding source, and impact fees are paid. What staff evaluation is that in this case, because of the special circumstances, it's either rare or hopefully unique situation, that impact fees not be waived, but that given the circumstances that impact fees be deferred. And so our recommendation is that impact fees not be waived, that the board find special circumstances in this particular case, and that you all direct the county attorney and myself to prepare an impact fee payment deferral agreement between the owner and the county and delay the impact fee payment until the time that the facility is sold. And that's our evaluation and recommendation in a nutshell. Be glad to answer any questions that you all might have.
Thank you very much. Before asking Stan questions, I was charged by the former chairman to address this a little bit. I just have a few short comments, which I think are for the most part consistent with Mr. Bowling's, so I'd like to just give them and then open up to my fellow commissioners and then the public. So for my part, after looking at some of the backup and talking with Mr. Bowling, I certainly find no fault on the part of Ms. Gilbert. So far as I can see, she basically just acted as like any other reasonable citizen would under the circumstances. Apparently, sometime in the past, a concurrency issue was missed by the city and the county. Odd things occasionally happen, and that's just the way life is. Mr. Bowling told me that this is the only time he recalls something like this occurring in the 34 years he spent working with the county. Importantly, he also told me that the city and county are already working on procedures to try to prevent a reoccurrence of this type of issue. And clearly, the impact fees owed have been deferred, and deferred with no material harm to the city or county for some years, and it may be reasonable to continue to defer the impact fees until there is either a substantial change of use or a change of ownership of the property. So with that, I'd be happy to see if the fellow commissioners have any questions of either Mr. Bowling or myself. Commissioner O'Brien?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Stan, if I follow everything correctly, basically the city told the previous owner, you need to go to the county and take care of this. The owner didn't, but the city didn't have any checklist to make sure that had been completed before they signed off on the change of use. Is that correct, or?
Right, that's the way they understand it. And in fact, those instructions were in writing to the previous owner in the approval letter that's in the backup. And what kind of the missing link there, I think, was a good system to know on the county side what's been approved, and on the city side, because some projects get approved and they're never done, right? They don't show up because the project is scrapped, basically. So the key was to close the gap, but that's correct. What I was telling Commissioner Solari earlier is, it's kind of the strange thing is through, in this case, it'd be city code enforcement, either code officers, made aware, they see activity, they're aware that something's going on, they check to see if there are permits. But a lot of times when it's businesses, it's competitors. You get a call from somebody, hey, I went through the process, I got my permits, just making sure that my competitor did the same thing. So there's usually a really, small town, these sorts of things. It's highly unusual that it wasn't picked up, but that's my only conclusion. It just simply dropped off and was not picked up.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, I guess I just have two suggestions. One, Stan, would it be appropriate then for Ms. Gilbert to appeal to the city first and ask them if they would be willing to pay the impact fee? Because it kind of sounds like by them not following through and verifying that the impact fees had been paid, would an appeal to the city be the first course of action?
I think under the ordinance, the county, the Board of County Commissioners, hears appeals and decides matters dealing with impact fees. So I think it is appropriate for the board to discuss it. I really don't have an opinion on a funding source other than, again, our recommendation is it's been deferred in practice. Deferring it to a time when it's not as much of a burden on the business is really our recommendation.
Okay, so then my second question would be if we do agree to the deferred, is that going to be applied as a lien or something so that in a future title search it will be flagged and we don't have this issue 2 or 3 or 4 years later whenever Ms. Gilbert might sell the property?
One of the things I was thinking of, Chairman or Commissioner, was simply have the agreement recorded in the public records. That way, if somebody comes through and picks up on it, it's going to be within the chain of title, and they'll be aware of it.
Would that be caught in a title?
Yeah, we will record it so that it will be within the chain.
Okay. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Zork.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this lack of concurrency determination was caught by basically a minor deck permit in the scope of things.
Correct. It was caught by, basically the building department looking at the permit history, and hey, there was never a permit for the child care facility either. So that's how that chain of investigation started. Correct.
Okay, and I don't know the date that this policy was put into effect, that we hold the almighty final decision on permits when there's a project in the city or elsewhere, when the impact fee or concurrency is not complied with. They do not get a single permit, I think with the exception of demolition, because you can demolish something without having to have a site plan or a new permit to take its place.
Right, that's correct. So the impact fee system is countywide. With respect to the city of Vero Beach, what's a little different about that is because we have the same building department. They do have access to our system, our CD Plus system and so forth, the city of Vero Beach. So they can, and we do a verification. City staff signs off on some of the concurrency form that we use and that the city of Vero Beach uses. So that's how we connect.
And I know this firsthand because Compass Medical, Icon Brewery, a number of other, they went to get their building permit and then found out the concurrency hadn't been done, and they did not receive a single permit for anything, I think with the exception of demolition that had gone through. The reason I bring this up is that, so we put a full light on this. I have a copy of 33 small and large permits that were applied for and issued by Indian River County. So out of these, I think 27 of them were issued to the prior owner. So that was 27 missed opportunities by our system to not collect the fees from the prior owner, the prior responsible party. I still personally feel Ms. Gilbert is not liable for anything. She can't go back on her title company. She can't go back on the seller. She can't go back. I don't think you could go to the city, but I think that'd be a short conversation because we provide that. So I'm going to give these 33, excuse me, copies of these 33 permits, and I did not put them, they may or may not be in chronological order, but best summation is 27 of those, or 27 missed opportunities, were from the prior owner. So I don't know how it happened, excuse me, 27 times when I could see it happening once. Some of these permits are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not small permits. They're significant. Other ones are smaller in nature, addition, roofs, other types of minor improvements maybe to the facility. Again, under the other owner, I should say owners, because some of these probably go back to the first owner. And looking at the updated timeline, I think one thing that should be put between items 2 and 3 is that was when the most substantial permit was issued, and again, a missed opportunity in 1998, May 27th, where we issued, on that case, a $201,000 building permit to one of the prior, I think that's 2 owners ago. So the idea of deferring it still means that Ms. Gilbert is the responsible, innocent party in this, because you paid, if you would have known this was out there, it would have been deducted off of the closing statement from the seller side, because that's who the responsible party was. What policy are we going to put into place so that now title companies, because title companies are already wondering, how is this going to, one, how do they become involved? How do they protect their buyers? What new form and process are we going to have to put into place? Now, this is once in 35 years, but it's still a significant amount of money that somebody's going to have to pay or come up with some other method. So do we wait to come up with a process to see if it happens again? But I see that the title folks are saying, I need to do this before I close any commercial transactions, because I need to know where the proper procedures and fees collected for the property that they're issuing title insurance on.
Sure. If I could just comment on that. So in the county, when we have a project in the county and we get probably 200 zoning confirmation letters a year, and it's different levels. It's checking setbacks, it's checking zoning. For businesses, it would be that they obtained county site plan approval and they went through the approval process. And our process includes getting a site CO inspection, getting the building permits, getting a CO, and all that is predicated upon one of the things is payment of impact fees. So that's part of our zoning confirmation letter process. So I think, we already essentially have a process that covers that when someone's doing their due diligence. And again, we get a lot of those letters in the county.
And I believe the attorney for the title company did send such a letter to both the city and the county, trying to do the best due diligence, maybe not using the exact right wording, but they did send that letter to you.
Yes.
or to, I don't know if it was the Bob Keating who it was
No,
addressed
it was to me. In 2008, it was to me, and it was at Tim McGarry, the city planning
back at
director.
the city. In both the city and the county, I think there was a deferral from the county back to the city.
I deferred it to the city.
Right.
Correct.
And then the city, again, I don't want to say dropped the ball or fell through the cracks or something. And again, we have someone here that's kind of stuck. So kind of just to summarize, 1995, there was 4 houses on the property. That was 23 years ago when this first event started. And just the cloud, I think that this is going to instill, I just don't think it's a positive thing. And then 14 years ago, when the actual occurrence, when the fees should have been what I call the trued up. They should have been trued up in a math spreadsheet when it went from 4 single family to the ALF. It would have showed a decrease, kind of like what we had to do with the Boys and Girls Club, St. Francis Manor, the old 1729 17th Avenue building. Boys and Girls Club on that one got a more lion's share of the credits because the true-up wasn't done at the time their permit was issued, which left a shortfall for the St. Francis Manor folks. So we have just such a lengthy history. 23 years ago since the first true-up didn't take place. It would have showed a less intense use. It wouldn't have solved the problem, but it would have been good paperwork to have in place. But 14 years ago, or 4 years before Ms. Gilbert bought it, I still think there should be some remedy to waive. I went to the property appraiser's office and said, how far can you statutorily go back if you miss a swimming pool addition or a room addition or some other taxable improvement? And they said their statutory limit is 3 years that they can go back on. So we're in essence saying we can go back 14 years back on someone, which I think is, I'm not saying 0, but I'm thinking 14 is just way too far.
Any other questions by the board? We have Ms. Gilbert here, and before I open up the public, I'd be happy to have you say whatever you care to say at this time.
Everything's pretty much been covered. I was coming here just to ask you to waive the fees because of a lot of time and missed opportunities here that by other people as well as, you know, the board and the county. I think everything's been said.
Thank you. I'll ask if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak on this issue. Name and address for the record, please.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Joseph Paladin, President of Biaswong Consulting. No matter how much common sense you try and bring into this, Commissioner Zork, there's only so much that the commission has the ability to do. And a mistake doesn't result in a legal commitment. Several mistakes were made. It doesn't make it legal. We can't waive an impact fee. It has to come from somewhere else. You just can't waive it. You just can't do away with it. So no matter how much common sense you try and make sense of this, the commission really just can't waive the impact fee. So I think that what staff has recommended by deferring it, I think is probably the best and fairest thing we can ask them to do at this time. So I support staff's decision.
Well, I'd like to see if you're in the Christmas spirit and you'd like to step up and pay them. If this was your property, Mr. Paladin, I think you would be fighting, if you had purchased something, I think you would
You're wrong,
fight
Commissioner Zork. If it was my property, I wouldn't be fighting it because I realize legally the commission can't do something that I would ask them to do. I've never asked the commission to do something legally they can't do. So no, you're wrong. Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, my original request was to look at revising our ordinance or to create a special exception. Just remember what I had asked for last time, to review the ordinance or create a special exception.
But revising the ordinance at this time wouldn't address Ms. Gilbert's concern.
No, and it would be much more lengthy.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I feel that Ms. Gilbert is a unfortunate victim of a set of unfortunate circumstances and miscommunication and the inability of the previous owner to carry out the direction perhaps that was given by the city of Vero Beach, and the commitment to the county was not set forth. That does not make it okay, because somebody didn't do what they had to do, so we just have to abide by that. It did happen some years ago. It appears that Ms. Gilbert has a very positive plan for the future, and it may take a very positive course for many, many, many years, and we hope her great success. Such being the case, I believe that staff recommendation is probably the most suitable at this point. I don't think that the city of Vero Beach is going to, again, I think that would be a short meeting. I don't think they're going to say, okay, well, we'll pay it and just let's get this out of the way because somebody didn't follow direction. And I don't think we should be doing that because somebody didn't follow direction and the title company had no ability to identify a fault if it was not recorded. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to move staff recommendation.
We have a motion from Commissioner Zork.
No.
Oh, excuse me, my apologies.
He's at the other end, sir.
Commissioner Fletcher, my apologies.
He had a different approach.
I'll second the motion, Mr. Chairman.
Motion from Commissioner Fletcher, second by Commissioner O'Brien. I believe there's a gentleman who might want to speak. Name and address for the record, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Edward Dillard. I reside at 935 24th Place Southwest in Vero Beach, Florida. It sounds to me like there is a sad issue with this young lady who has acquired this property without the knowledge of knowing what was going on with this impact fee. But I do side with the gentleman here that the impact fee is still an outstanding bill. And unfortunately, in the society where we live in, if these mistakes are not caught, unfortunately, it passes to the owner, to the next owner. If she cannot have legal remedy to go after the owner from the previous the previous owner, then it would be my suggestion that she need to get legal counsel. But this board, in my opinion, does not have you just don't have the authority just waive it and say, okay, we're going to defer it to the next owner, because then you only exacerbate the problem. The next owner now has that problem, and they're going to have to pay these impact fees, which were given to somebody from what you say 23 years ago. This should have been taken care of 23 years ago. And so I would suggest to you, ma'am, to go and find the owner and say, listen, you owe me the impact fee because the county has come down on me and said, I owe this, you owe me. She shouldn't have to pay it, but unfortunately, you all don't have, in my opinion, you don't have the authority just to say, okay, it's waived. It's on the property. If it were my property, I would have to pay it. Rather, it was, I live in a property where it was passed down from my father. He passed away. But everything that my dad did passed on to me. And the same with her, unfortunately. Now, again, I would recommend to her to go and seek legal remedy from the previous owner and from the title company and say, listen, I had to pay this. Y'all owe me. But y'all can't just, just saying, oh, well, we just defer it to the next person. That's not right to the next person that comes along and buys that property. So my heart goes out to you, but y'all hands are tied.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? We have a motion from Commissioner Fleischer, which is, want to make sure I understand it, is to basically defer the payment of the $7,930.78 until there is a change of ownership.
That's correct, sir. And have it duly recorded so that this does not happen again.
Great. And the second is by Commissioner O'Brien. Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then just, I take it there won't be any interest or late charges added on. It's just going to be the impact fee, and we're not going to charge interest. Is that correct? Okay, very good. And then, in case Ms. Gilbert, instead of having the total amount due at closing and have that become a big issue, if she wanted to, would she be able to make partial payments over time to bring this number down? Could that be part of the
partial satisfaction? Sure.
It could either be that, or it could be made as part of the purchase price. I mean,
well, if it's part of the purchase price, then the whole amount is going to be negotiated. My thought was, if Ms. Gilbert doesn't want to have to worry about that, and if she's going to hang on to this for 5 or 10 years, if she wants to pay that number down and eventually get rid of it before a closing, give her that option. I'm not saying she will or not, but if she wants to make partial payments,
okay, so
I think she should be allowed to.
As she continues to own the property, if she wants to make.
Oh, yeah, no,
okay.
if she owns it and wants to get that number worked down so it's not an issue at closing, then I think she should be able to make partial payments at her option.
I'll just ask Stan, do you see any problem with that?
I think if the board authorized a payment option, both options, we can work on it. So,
okay,
no problem with that.
And
it would be up to Ms. Gilbert if she wants to execute both or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. If she has no interest, that's fine, but I think she should have the option if she wants to.
We'll work with her and we can work both options.
Good with that on you?
Yes, I am. I'm looking at Mrs. Gilbert to see if she's interested in that option being available. No.
That's fine.
I wouldn't either, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's good of you to bring it up. Any other discussion by the board? We have the motion from Commissioner Fleischer, second by Commissioner O'Brien. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Passes 4-1. Commissioner Zorc dissenting. And at this time, I think it's a great time before utilities begin, so it's probably the biggest items of the day, to take a 10-minute break.
Much better.
We're back. We are continuing with departmental matters. We now move to utility services. First up is a request to waive bid process for caustic soda chemical. Good morning, Mr. Burke.
Good morning. For the record, Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. We have agenda item 12G1 in front of you. As noted in the agenda item, the prices fluctuate quite drastically for caustic soda. So every 4 to 6 weeks, we tend to solicit Allied, Britain Mid-South, or Harcross Chemicals for the best price rather than be tied to a price for the entire fiscal year. And as such, we're asking the board to waive the bid requirements for the caustic soda for fiscal year 18-19, authorize the purchasing manager, after approval by the budget office, to approve purchase orders and change orders for authorized firms up to the available budget amount. Certainly available for any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Burke?
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Adams, second by Commissioner Flesher. Any comments or questions from the public? There being none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Mr. Burke, you're up again with the Berry Island Reclaimed Water Main System Analysis.
Thank you. We currently do not have a reclaimed water main that runs along the A1A corridor. It's been discussed through some meetings in the past that the county utilities needs to diversify and increase its reclaimed water footprint. One of the ways we can do that is to possibly install a pressurized reuse line along the A1A corridor, both to the north of the Disney Vero intersection and also to the south, about 2.4 miles to the Old Winter Beach Road. However, we need to determine if it's even technically feasible to do so. What we have in front of you today for consideration is a work order submitted under the CCNA agreement dated April 17, 2018, with a local engineering firm to do basically a lot of potholing in and around the A1A corridor to determine where the existing utilities are located and whether or not it would be feasible to install a pressurized main along the A1A corridor. The total lump sum amount is $102,800, and staff is seeking recommendation for the attached work order number 3, authorizing the above-mentioned professional services for Schilke, Bill, and Stoddard under the existing CCNA agreement, and authorize the chairman to execute work order 3 on their behalf for a total sum of $102,800. Again, I'm available for any questions that the board may have.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Burke? I'll ask if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak on this issue. There being none, commissioners?
Move approval.
Motion from Commissioner Flesher, second by Commissioner O'Brien. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. We move on to Utility Services, Blue Cypress Lake Informational Update. Good morning. This looks like it's going to be the big event of the day as all these well-dressed people come up to support Mr. Burke with this item. Good morning. Mr. Burke, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you again. Vincent Burke, Director of Utility Services. To my right is Eric Charist, he's an Environmental Permitting Compliance Manager. And to his right is Bill Lynch from Jones Edmonds and Tony Yanicki for the consultant that's been part of our team. So what we have today is a brief presentation from staff to go through some slides, hopefully not duplicative, general in nature. We're going to turn it over to our consultants, Joan Edmonds, that's done some work and analysis that was provided in the attachments, technical memos 1 through 4, and the attached backup. But also we have here representatives from the St. John's River Water Management District, Dr. Doberfil, and he has a presentation as well. And I believe there's some interested stakeholders and folks that would also like to be able to present some information for consideration before the board decides to move forward with how they're going to move forward. So without further ado, we'll get into the short presentation. As noted, there was an article that came out earlier last year and had mentioned that Blue Cypress Lake was obviously in trouble with some additional nutrient levels. We have here a graph in the upper right-hand portion of the screen that notes the biosolid applications in the upper St. Johns River Basin. So our focus today is not to talk about the upper St. Johns, but we have representatives from the district that will certainly do so. We're going to focus on the Blue Cypress Lake watershed area. Here you can see some existing sampling locations with, at the top part of the screen, something that staff had brought to this board prior to the board deciding to enact the first temporary moratorium, 180 days, the nitrogen levels in the milligrams per liter on the y-axis, and some of the dates on the x-axis with some historical information with regards to the nitrogen as well as the total phosphorus levels. Now keep in mind this is just a singular point in the station. There are widely different things that can happen, whether at the shoreline or at different locations within the area, but certainly cause for concern is the bottom portion in the red is the elevated levels of the total phosphorus from about 2007 or 8 time period up to the present time. Here's just an aerial map showing the St. Johns River biosolids applications in and close to the Blue Cypress Lake area, which is in the center portion of your screen. Pulling information from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection Oculus site, we noticed that certainly there's been some activity, mostly at the Hayman Ranch in the top left portion of the screen, but also the Presley Ranch, which is in the middle portion of the screen here. In 2013, you'll see that there was a large jump. This coincides with, in essence, the Okeechobee limitations that were put into effect. And we feel that some of the biosolids that had been previously applied in that area had shifted up to the Indian River County area and the Hayman Ranch area. So just a quick summary, we had provided this, this rundown before. Going through here, we did contract with Jones Edmonds and Associates. There was some backup as far as the funding language and the amounts in your agenda item. We have reached out to the regulatory agencies. We've had multiple conference calls and discussions with the regulatory agencies. We did present information prior to the public hearing and at the public hearing, and at that time the board took option to craft and implement a temporary biosolids land application moratorium for 180 days that currently expires in January of next year, January 14th to be exact. We did reach out to the property owners, and I must say that Mr. Presley should be commended not only for his willingness to work with the county. As you recall, we did travel out to the site, the county administrator, the utilities director, public works director, community development director, and we're given a tour of the site and the lands to get a feel for what's been going on at that location. And you may also recall that the DEP did create a biosolids technical advisory committee. They've had several meetings since that time, but the first meeting was held September 5th, 2018 of this year. Since that time, JEA has been working with the regulatory agencies, compiling data and the technical memos that have been attached. We have continued to keep in touch with the folks from the district, the DEP and IFAS. The property owner did voluntarily agree to cease the application of Class B biosolids. You recall that there was an initial period in May that they had applied, but then there was a large precipitation event in the latter part of May. Since about mid-May, there has been no biosolids applied at the Presley Ranch at the Blue Cypress Lake watershed area. We talked about the Class B biosolids temporary moratorium, resolution ordinance 218-084. We have noticed that there's been 3 technical advisory committee meetings on November 6th, and specifically 2 back-to-back meetings with a lot of technical information presented by not only Maurice Baker, but Dr. O'Connor and some of the other folks on the TAC. So I think I covered most of the information. Again, the big issue is what's next is the existing moratorium is set to expire, so the board directed staff to come back prior to the expiration. We have 1 meeting on the 8th, but did not want to compress too much information at that particular time, so we decided to bring some information back to the board for consideration today prior to the expiration of the first moratorium on January 14th. So through this time, we've taken a look at the application rates as described through many of the formulas that take into account factors including but not limited to soil characteristics, the runoff and leaching potentials, the groundwater depth, the plant available nitrogen, the content per dry ton of biosolids. There's an agronomic crop demand for nitrogen based on the usage of the crop, the uptake. We have some IFAS studies that have honed in on some of the availability for the crop and the uptake of nutrients in that area. Looking at some of the pH monitoring, there's specific requirements in the FDEP issued permit that holds the haulers and or the permit holders to specific pH levels that can be applied. You have to look at obviously some metal testing and loading. Those tests are run by the utilities and have to be submitted as part of the DMRs, and there's some soil fertility testing, all with under the umbrella of the FDEP permitting jurisdictions. Again, this is under a nutrient management plan, NMP. That nutrient management plan typically is done by a registered professional engineer in the state of Florida and submitted to the DEP for approval. We have mentioned... Yes, sir.
One slide.
Yes, sir.
You said it was done under nutrient management plan?
Mm-hmm.
And as I read that, it's basically done based on the crop needs for nitrogen.
Yes.
Okay, I just think that's important going forward, so I just wanted to... Thanks.
University of Florida IFAS determinations show that allowable amounts of biosolids applied may lead to excessive amounts of phosphorus. So there's a phosphorus capacity index that, again, prior to this, I did not have a lot of information on, but we understand that the phosphorus loadings is really a transport model used to determine what happens with the loading of nutrients on a particular pasture field based on the type of material that's being grown and the ability of the soil to uptake the phosphorus. What should be noted, and we put into the agenda item, is that you have a P-balance, and that P-balance shows the availability for that phosphorus to be taken up. So an analogy could be that you have a teacup full of tea, and you're trying to add additional tea, but if that teacup is full, what's going to happen is you're going to have excess spillage of that tea, and in this case, the soil below this phosphorus balance says that there's a surplus. The soil could be saturated is something that has been explained to me, in essence, that it would not be allowed to take up those additional nutrients. So when you have a high rain event like in May of 2018, or you have other runoff type situations, if there's phosphorus that is not being taken up by the soil and nutrients, then you do have an issue with off-site discharge or perhaps downward leaching of that into the groundwater. It must be noted that the recommendation for ice fertilization, that's if the soil and tissue tests are low, so this could be changed based on those numbers. We've noticed that from the St. John's, Upper St. John's River water basin, is the calculated rate was about 5 to 10 times what the allowable phosphorus agronomic rate should be for particular grazed beef cattle, which is quite high. So we pulled some of the DEP permit information. And just in 2017, this is not the first part of 2018 when Mr. Presley voluntarily stopped applying, but in 2017, just bring your attention to obviously the 3,000 acres and just about 5,300 dry tons of material. That equates to 740,000 pounds of total nitrogen and about 293,000 pounds of total phosphorus. What we made mention and what the TAC members have obviously come to some sort of realization is that the existing rules that are in place today need to be updated. In essence, if Mr. Presley were allowed to apply based on the current rule set, and for the remainder portion of 2017, he would have been allowed an additional 226,000 pounds of total phosphorus. So he did not, but he could have under the existing permit that he had.
And again, looking at those numbers, the 740,000 pounds of N and the 293,000 pounds of phosphorus, that's a ratio of about 2.5 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I think that's important going forward. Thank you.
So you may recall that we provided a letter from the DEP Director, Southeast District, Jennifer Smith, to H&H Sludge, noting that they were in the wet season, could not dump per their permit, and in doing so would be a violation of the permit. Again, Mr. Presley voluntarily decided not to continue applying biosolids to try to get more information. That was followed up by the Tuesday, July 17th public hearing meeting in which the board did pass the ordinance, which again goes until January 14th of 2019. So staff recommendation is to extend the moratorium or to create another moratorium that would go for an additional 180 days until such time that additional information can be reviewed and analyzed, not only from the DEP but also from the district in response to what the TAC comes up with. I may or may not have mentioned, but it was in the backup, that the next biosolids TAC meeting is January 23rd. So we certainly would be looking forward to what the TAC comes up with at that point. And if necessary, revise the rules in the Florida Administrative Code regarding the land application of Class B biosolids. Another option would be to reach out to the DEP to pursue an emergency order request to have the DEP restrict the application of Class B biosolids within Indian River County. Before I turn it over to JE, I just want to note that the county administrator did have a conversation with Mr. Presley this morning. Mr. Presley has voluntarily said that he would not apply biosolids for this year. So I think that he should be commended for a number of reasons. Not only that, he recognizes that there's obviously more information that needs to be gathered, but certainly is willing to work with us. So I did want to make sure that the board was aware that Mr. Presley is looking to obviously get more information, has voluntarily. I don't have anything in writing, but certainly was allowed to verbally say that he's willing to not continue to put down biosolids.
And I understood you to say for this year. You mean into 2019?
I believe it's for this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Brown.
Yes, I think he means for 2019 for the,
Okay.
for the upcoming.
I'm sorry. That's what I
Thank
meant. Following year. So also, I would like to thank the district, who's been very good in terms of some of the information that they've had. I must note that I'm not going to steal Mr. Doverfield's thunder, but certainly the district has taken an aggressive approach to try to understand what's going out there. They've installed piezometers. They're looking at some of the tracers for the anthropogenic influences, and they're looking at not only the surface water, but also some of the groundwater stuff. And Mr. Doverfield will talk about that in a second, but before he does, I'm going to turn it over to my right, Mr. Bill Lynch from Jones Edmonds and Associates. So you can probably use that. 1 second, Bill. Don't fight me.
Good morning, Mr. Lynch, how are you?
Good morning.
Thanks for coming today.
Yes. I'm Bill Lynch. I'm an environmental engineer with the company Jones Edmonds and Associates. Joining me today for this presentation is Dr. Tony Janicki, who collectively we worked on the water quality study that you approved back in July. So our objective was to gather, validate, and analyze data, and then conduct assessments that would help determine whether there was an anthropogenic cause that biosolids was contributing to degradation of Blue Cypress Lake. So we did that over a course of several months, and we prepared technical memorandums at various steps, and we did that for a couple different reasons, because it was a dynamic process with agencies involved and others involved. We wanted to present our information in technical memorandums that were ultimately summarized in a fact sheet, and then what Tony's going to present is a high-level overview of the findings. Our intent is not to be redundant of what Mr. Burke said or what St. John's is, but we're also here to answer any specific questions you would have with regard to that stuff. So with that, Dr. Janicki, you're up. Thank you, Bill.
That on?
Red light's on.
There we go. Good morning. And as Bill said, I'm here to basically answer a question, but I want to give you a brief overview of the work that we've done recently for the county. Obviously, everyone is pretty well aware of the issue that occurred this past summer in Blue Cypress Lake, a lake that was well known to be very pristine over the years, and this year suffered from a bloom of blue-green alga, referred to as microcystis, which unfortunately has the capability of producing a harmful toxin, and raises the concern specifically about the issue of the bloom in the lake. And led to the need to look at other, whatever information might be available to explain why that bloom occurred. I must say that, and Dr. Dean Doverfield will talk about this some more, but we've been standing on the shoulders of the Water Management District. We're using a lot of the information that they've collected over the years. And a lot of that, again, much of the work that we're presenting is based on data provided by the Water Management District. You saw this previously in Mr. Burke's presentation. It looks at the time series over the years of nitrogen on the top and phosphorus on the bottom. The important thing when you see this is that oftentimes when you have a nutrient pollutant source, oftentimes you would see very similar patterns in time in both nitrogen and phosphorus. However, we don't see that necessarily in Blue Cypress Lake. In particular, since about 2006, we have an ever-increasing concentration of phosphorus in the lake, but even in some more recent years, there's actually been a reduction in nitrogen, which is something that is not expected and necessary to look at the data more clearly as to what cause phosphorus going up might be. You've seen this before a couple different ways. These are the areas on the lower right, or lower left rather, that show you where the biosolids are being applied in the Blue Cypress Lake watershed. But what's very clear is the large increase in biosolids application to the lake, to all the areas within the watershed, beginning in 2013, a very significant increase over in that time. Now, where does phosphorus come from in entering a lake? And there are a multitude of sources, but they're generally accepted that there are 4 major sources of phosphorus entering the lake. We're all well aware of the direct runoff that occurs during storm events, which can deliver a significant amount of water and pollutants as well. Groundwater can also enter the lake in a variety of different ways and provide another potential avenue for phosphorus to enter a lake. The other discharge from point sources might be a potential source, in this case, a very, very, very minor source in Blue Cypress Lake. And lastly, the legacy of phosphorus that entered the lake historically, much of the phosphorus ends up in the sediments. And given the right biochemical conditions, that phosphorus can be released from the sediments. Typically, that occurs when there's very little dissolved oxygen in bottom waters. That's not the case here in Blue Cypress Lake. So having eliminated discharge and perhaps those internal loads, we're looking primarily at runoff and groundwater as perhaps being the most predominant sources of phosphorus entering the lake. One of the things that we did, again, building on information provided by the Water Management District, they've been doing modeling of the lake so that we can have an understanding of the amount of phosphorus entering the lake and the amount of water entering the lake and the amount of water leaving the lake. So we can have a water budget, if you will. And knowing what the concentrations are of phosphorus in the water entering the lake and the phosphorus in the water leaving the lake, we can come up with a budget. And this is what you see here on this bar chart. In years in which the bars are above the zero line, that means there's more phosphorus going in the lake than coming out. And you can see that the preponderance of years prior to 2013 is there's more phosphorus entering the lake than coming out. However, there's been a consistent situation since 2013 where there's actually more phosphorus leaving the lake than coming in. Now, the information that we have for the phosphorus entering the lake is primarily the direct runoff. What we don't have any information on right now is the amount of phosphorus entering the lake via groundwater. So one of two things may be happening with the fact that there's more going out than coming in. One thing could be that the amount of phosphorus in the lake is actually going down, but we know that's not the case. The mass, in fact, is continuing to increase. So there must be an unaccounted for source of phosphorus that we have not yet have any our arms around. And it's my opinion that that's likely going to be groundwater. And there's clearly an opportunity, and Mr. Brick showed this also. This is an indication, again, of the lack of the ability of the watershed to retain the phosphorus that's being put down as biosolids. These are 23 fields in the Presley Ranch in particular. And again, what's of concern are those red points. Those are points, those are fields in which additional phosphorus application is going to leave that system fairly quickly and enter the receiving water body. So again, and Dean is going to talk some more about the specific things that they're working on. And Bill, if you could make some comments on the permit.
So Tony gave you the technical review. One of the other things we did is we looked at the applications for biosolids applications on the sites, the permits, the annual reports that were prepared, and we found a couple things. Recent compliance inspection reports, the two most recent ones for both Hayman Ranch and for Presley Ranch, FDP knows that they're in compliance. So it was important, building off of what Mr. Burke had said earlier, to say that the ranches where the biosolids are being applied are doing them in accordance with their permits. Soils tests show that the application fields have increased phosphorus concentrations. Tony kind of showed that in his graphs earlier, and that's greater than there was 5 years ago when they measured them last time. And from DEP's perspective, that shows that they're compliant, right? That the soil is handling the phosphorus. But what we're concerned with is that the soil, which may be washed, ends up in groundwater and ends up in the lake. Which points out the third bullet, surface water and groundwater quality monitoring are not required by the permits. Why we don't have the groundwater data to assess is because it's not required to be collected. So the permits and the rules don't effectively protect the water quality of the receiving water in Blue Cypress Lake. The permittee and the appliers are doing it in accordance with permit, but the conditions of the permit are insufficient to protect the water quality in Blue Cypress Lake. So in closing, monitoring and reporting meet the permit requirements, but they don't protect the water.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, Bill, when we talk about in compliance, specific to the Presley Ranch, their nutrient management plan and the nitrogen load is based upon them conducting 3 cuts of hay per year out at the Presley Ranch. Now, for the last several years, you know, we've been through some drought years and some heavy flooding years, and in addition, they're running cattle on those fields. I would have a hard time thinking they were able to get 3 cuts out of those fields over the last few years. And I asked DEP specifically, when they did the compliance test, did you ask for verification that they did 3 cuts? I mean, could they tell you how many bales of hay each 4 months they got, or receipts to show they cut it and sold it? And they said, no, we don't look for that. So when you say they're in compliance, there's no verification that they actually did 3 cuts of hay, and that's what the nutrient loading is based upon. Second thing is, the nutrient management plan says that they're supposed to put down 80 pounds of nitrogen early in the spring, and then they can put down 80 pounds after every cutting. But in May of this year, they put down several hundred, up to 300 pounds per acre. To me, that's a violation, but according to DEP, they told me this. I said, well, no, timing really doesn't matter. They can put all they want all day long. So DEP can say they're in compliance, but in my mind, they're not. So I just want that to be out there. And I agree with what Vinny said. This whole board, from the day this started, we don't want to criminalize anything. And I think the Presley Ranch folks were kind of sold a bill of bad goods. You know, they were probably told that, hey, this is, you know, great, and it's free fertilizer, and it doesn't have a problem. So, you know, you're great taking it. And they probably said, okay, that sounds good to us. And I really think they're kind of innocent victims here of this whole thing. And a lot of those management plans are written by the haulers. So I think the Presley folks just said, okay, whatever y'all, if this is what you're saying, then it sounds good to us, let's do it. So I want to make sure that we're not looking to criminalize the Presleys, but I think all this data is showing this biosolid dumping is really, really bad, and what DEP is allowing them to put down is just totally out of control in my mind, so just.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I'd like to add on a couple things just to see if I got it right, because I think that this is somewhat difficult, especially for the public, I mean, to grasp some of these things. So I'd like to maybe go back to sort of a little bit of a bigger picture thing. And one of the reasons I want to give it, because one of the things that's astounded me in this process is that there are actually people on the biosolids TACT who actually seem surprised that there could be a phosphorus problem. But since, you know, again, I go back 6 months to the time when the former commissioner, the chairman of the Board of County Commissioners, put me on the poop committee, and when I didn't know anything,
Best news ever.
didn't really know anything about biosolids, so I've read a lot of the literature. And so far, everything in the literature, a lot of it coming from IFAS, is absolutely consistent with everything you gentlemen have said today, and consistent with the problem in biosolids. I'm just going to pick out a couple things that you wrote in your fact sheet, which to me sort of ties it down and, for me, explains what the problem is. Under current knowledge, number 3, a sustained upward trend in total phosphorus in Moose Lake began approximately in 2016 and is not accompanied by upward total nitrogen trends. And again, you talked about the nutrient management program, which is nitrogen-based, so no surprise there. Application of Class B biosolids began in 2006 in Blue Cypress Lake watershed based on the agronomic needs of nitrogen for hay production. Presley Ranch biosolids applied began in 2013. Again, nitrogen-based. Analysis results. Prior to 13, inputs exceeded outputs from the lake. Since 2013, more phosphorus began leaving the lake when entering the lake, which indicates an unaccounted source for phosphorus since 2013. Again, not surprising, especially when, as you pointed out, the agronomic needs for Bahia are something in the range of 10 to 1, but the biosolids being dumped on the Presley Ranch is 2.5 to 1. So huge ratio problem. And I think that the 10-to-1 is actually high, given the prior applications of phosphorus, which stays in the soil and around the soil. And again, from literature I've read, is after you have an application of N-based biosolids, you often have no further need for phosphorus for some time. And the literature also points out that one of the good things about biosolids is that it is slow release, again, meaning that there's going to be phosphorus sticking around. So again, the 13, which is the clincher, is the resulting phosphorus loading averages close to 10 times the agronomic needs. Consistent with literature, consistent with exactly what you'd understand, and then what's happening in the water is consistent with over-application of phosphorus. So again, I'm absolutely astounded that there are people on the biotechs committee who think that we're silly talking about the possible overloading of phosphorus in a water body. Just, for a poor guy who doesn't know anything about anything, really, I mean, I just can't get over my surprise. So with that said, I'll let you all continue.
We don't.
So I think we're going to...
Are there any questions?
Dr. Dean Doberfill, who's with St. John's River Water Management District, to go over his presentation.
Great. Welcome, Dr. Delafield. Name and address for the record, please.
Dean Doberfill, St. John's River Water Management District, 4623 Northwest 16th Place, Gainesville, Florida.
And will you be upset if we just inject to ask some questions as you're going through, or should we wait
Not
till
at
the
all.
end?
Feel free.
Thank you.
This is going to be a pretty data-intensive talk.
Which is why there might be some questions.
Yes. This is a reprisal of the talk that I gave a couple weeks ago to the Technical Advisory Committee for the biosolids. Mr. Burke invited me to come down and give the commission the same talk. So that's what you'll be seeing. I'm going to broaden the perspective a little bit. We're going to start with Blue Cypress Lake, but we, of course, are concerned with the entire river and its watershed. So we're taking a bit of a bigger picture look at this. It's not just a problem with Blue Cypress or that watershed. This is a problem that spreads beyond those borders. We've been dealing with biosolids issues since probably 2008. We just didn't realize it, I think. As far back as 2008, we noticed that phosphorus was going up in Blue Cypress Lake. However, we felt that what was happening was our management of water levels in Blue Cypress Marsh was contributing to this issue. So we took a careful look at that. And in fact, what we saw was that through repeated droughts and low water events, we would get, when the marsh was rehydrated, we would get flushes of total organic carbon and phosphorus. Both are naturally occurring events in marshes. We just thought we were exacerbating that through our water management. We amended that in 2011. We ceased environmental discharges. So instead of releasing water throughout the year, we only released it when we hit our regulation schedule. As you can see in the latter part of this graph, the middle graph, total organic carbon started behaving, if you will. So we said, great, I think we're handling the water better. We're reducing the drying out of the marsh. The problem was phosphorus just kept going up. So new problem. We thought we had a handle on it, but something else is going on. Coincidentally, throughout the upper basin, we were seeing phosphorus go up as well. So a lot of these areas don't have controlled water levels and have limited marsh interaction. So again, we were puzzled as to what was happening throughout the basin to cause these increased water.
Mr. Delafield, can you go back to that slide and just
Certainly.
explain for all of us what the meaning of the red arrows and the green arrows would be?
Red arrows are a 15-year statistical increase in total phosphorus levels. So we produce a status and trends report every year. The trends are the last 15 years of data, and that's what's shown in this graph. Red arrows are statistical increases, green downward arrows are statistical decreases, and squares are no change over 15 years.
Thank you.
So we were seeing phosphorus trends, so 11 of our 36 water quality sites in the upper basin, for which we had 15 years of data, were showing increasing total phosphorus trends. We're also seeing increasing trends of chlorophyll A in Blue Cypress Lake. And of course, chlorophyll is a measurement of algal growth and production, and it responds to increasing fertilization. We were also seeing an increased incidence of microcystis, like Dr. Janicki said. And these are class 1 waters. These are waters that can and will be used for potable use. So that's a concern that we are seeing increased incidence of a potentially toxic species in these waters. We're also impacting potentially downstream TMDL targets. We have existing TMDLs, and 31 of those downstream segments are impaired or on the 4D list. So disturbing trends for a number of reasons. So in looking at this problem, one of the things we wanted to tie with these increasing phosphorus levels was land use change. Often when you see intensification of land use change, you see increasing eutrophication of the downstream water bodies. But in the case of the upper basin of the St. Johns River, we saw no real change. Most of the land use west of the river is in improved pasture. That hasn't significantly changed in the last, well, since 1994. Very, very small changes in the land use patterns. So that rules out significant role of development. So as we were puzzling through this, about 2016, I believe, one of my staff stumbled on a coverage, a GIS coverage provided by DEP. And he looked at it and it had the word biosolids. We had no idea what that meant in 2016. And we started looking at some of the DEP data and started seeing some rather large numbers. And we started looking at where some of these things were being applied and the phosphorus levels and trends we were seeing. We started to put those together, and we started seeing an association where in those watersheds where we had cumulative biosolids that were reaching 60, 70, 80 kilograms per hectare, that was associated with declining trends in water quality. So at this point, we're starting to say, okay, maybe there's a cause and effect relationship here. So that's 2016. One of the things that didn't exist then was a real good spatial data set from DEP. They had a lot of records, some were paper, but those records are very important. They had a lot of important numbers on them. Had information about application, where these things were being put on, had information about specific fields and where the biosolids material was coming from, and had information about the nutrients. So we thought we could use a lot of these records and start to put these together in a spatial database to try to understand what was going on in the whole river basin. And the generator records actually give concentrations of total nitrogen and total phosphorus. So we had a lot of the data that we could work with. One of the things that we can pull out once we start tying individual fields and applications and generator information is where this stuff is coming from. So in 2017, looking at the upper St. Johns River, Class B biosolids were produced at 42 generating facilities. 3 of those facilities land applied more than 5,000 dry tons of biosolids in the upper basin in 2017. You can see from that graphic some of the largest generators that delivered to the upper basin were down in Broward, Miami-Dade, down in that area. And in fact, in the year 2017, 89% of the biosolids applied in the upper St. Johns River Basin came from outside of that basin. So I think that the Okeechobee rule is probably pushing a lot of material north, and we're starting to see that. Once we had started to put this together, we could look at our entire water management district and the major water sheds and look at how prevalent this problem was. And it turns out that the Upper St. John's really stands out pretty notably. It's not unusual in the total number of sites that are or have been permitted, but it has many more active permits. So you can see it highlighted in red. The Upper St. John's has 30 sites that have or are permitted. 17 are active. In 2017, 14 of those sites got biosolids application. Our other basins had far fewer. So this basin is really standing out among all of our major watersheds. When you look at that in a cumulative sense, we've been able to put together data since 1998. It's not entirely reliable until about the 2005-2007 time period. But over that time, we've been able to account for 30,000 tons of TN applied in that basin and 13,000 tons of phosphorus. And I should point out, these are not dry tons of material. These are tons of nutrients. So big, big numbers. I think Dr. Janicki maybe showed this graph. Again, cumulatively, very, very big numbers. And I think the cumulative numbers are what we're starting to focus in on. As Commissioner Solari pointed out, this phosphorus, once you put it on, it's there. So cumulative numbers are very important. Once we pulled all that data together, we put it into a GIS format, and we are able to look at individual permit holders, not just the total permit site, but we have information for each individual field. So for each individual field, we know how much material, where it came from, when it was applied, and we can start to look at that in a spatial sense, which brings a lot of power to our analyses. One of the surprising things is currently in the Upper St. John's, there are 136,000 permitted acres. That's 12% of the total area of that basin. That's not to say that biosolids are being put on every one of those acres, but they are, all of those acres are eligible under permit. You saw this as well. Typical fertilizer labels have ratios, so nitrogen to phosphate to potassium. For typical grass crops, you might see a 4:1 typical ratio. Biosolids tend to be skewed. We've pointed that out here before. They typically have much more phosphorus than nitrogen, so there's an unbalanced supply. Depending on, yes?
Can I ask you? Back when I was in citrus, if we got a load of fertilizer that came in, every load had an analysis. So when the biosolids is dumped, does every load of biosolids have an analysis?
Yes. In the nutrient management plan.
No, not in the nutrient management plan. I'm not too trustful of that right now.
Yes, the generators have an analysis.
No, I'm not asking about that. I'm asking if the landowner wanted to reach up into the truck and get an analysis, could he get it?
That I'm unsure about.
Okay, I mean, I'm just, my guess is the answer is no. So again, to me, this is important because I get really upset about this biosolids when people try to hide behind the Right to Farm Act, which I'm not saying anybody is doing here, but I mean, that keeps on coming up. And as a farmer, we wouldn't have put anything on our property without knowing what the analysis was. And I can't see a responsible farmer really growing anything without knowing what the analysis is. And I just, again, from limited knowledge of biosolids, don't believe that every load of biosolids is actually coming with an analysis, which would give a responsible farmer the type of information he'd need to do his job. So I'm sorry, I am up here trying to control myself, but you know, this is.
I appreciate that. I think the take-home message is that everybody probably recognizes that biosolids have an unbalanced supply rate. when you look through the literature, various literature recommends 11 to 17 pounds of phosphorus per acre per year if both the soil and the crop tissue tests are low. IFAS actually allows up to 40 pounds per acre if certain conditions are met, if you have low phosphorus in the soil and low phosphorus in the plant tissue, and you're having multiple haying events. They allow up to 40 pounds per year. But in 2017, if you do the math, we had 20,000 acres where biosolids were spread, and if you look at the total quantity over the whole basin, we were applying about over 100 pounds of phosphorus per acre. So regardless of the numbers you use for what the grass needs, it still appears that the phosphorus was being applied in excess of likely crop demands. One of the other things that we did was look at a number of sites. Farmers are required, applicators are required to test the soil once every 5 years. We have, for many ranches, we had data for 2012, and data was taken again in 2017 and submitted to DEP. This is in their Oculus database. We've just taken it and made it spatially explicit. But I've got a couple of examples of different permit holders and individual fields. And you'll see this pattern of green is low. These are fields that would potentially be eligible for phosphorus fertilization. Medium and high likely have sufficient phosphorus. So when you look at 2012 compared to 2017, a number of those fields have moved from low into the high category. Probably would not be eligible for phosphorus application. Another field, 2012, 2017, again, same theme. Many of those fields have moved from a low condition to a high condition. Getting a little redundant here, but similar. Here's a area where all the fields were low, but by 2017 we were into the majority of fields were into the medium and high. Final example, we have a permit, an applicating site here. Many of the fields started high and remain high, and some moved from low to high. So many of these ranches appear to have sufficient phosphorus in the fields. Actually, this is my next example. This is the Presley Ranch. I'm only calling this one out because they have been such great cooperators with us. In fact, they are, Mr. Presley was guiding our staff and IFAS staff around yesterday to put in pore water samplers. So commendations to Mr. Presley. He's really gone out of his way to help us and help the investigation. Okay, so we know within the upper basin, lots of biosolids are being applied. We know where it is. We've pinned down when those major applications have occurred, what is happening in those watersheds and the water quality. And I've got a few examples here. On the left, you'll see a map with stars. Those correspond to tributaries to the river, and you'll see the data on the right side. The dots indicate total phosphorus in our water quality samples, and the bars indicate biosolids application by year. This is in terms of phosphorus, not total quantity, but total quantity of the nutrient, and kilograms per hectare. Generally what you're seeing, more biosolids applied, phosphorus is going up. Pretty simple association. Different watersheds show that to different levels for various reasons. Could be a larger watershed, it could be more restricted application. Each watershed is different. So North Wolf Creek, for example, we see that water quality has gone up pretty markedly. Pennywash Creek has gone up not quite as much. So differences in watersheds. Here you see Crabgrass Creek and Jane Green Creek, similar patterns, biosolids applied and going up. I'd call out Jane Green Creek. It's had a longer history of biosolids application in that catchment, and you can see that that the water quality is deteriorated quite a bit more. So there's potentially a lag effect between when these materials are applied and when the effect may be seen downstream. 10 Mile Creek, another example of what I would call probably a pretty responsive creek. We saw applications really jump up in 2013. It was a couple years before we really saw water quality responding to that. South Wolf Creek, we know there's biosolids that have been applied, but we haven't seen the response. We've seen a couple incidences of phosphorus, but we haven't seen a notable effect in that one quite yet. 6 Miles, a similar example, very noisy. We haven't seen a discernible effect of biosolids there yet, so there could be other things going on. And Blue Cypress Creek, I will call out as notable. We're all interested in Blue Cypress Lake. The interesting thing about this site is originally we had a site very near the lake, and we thought that the site in the creek was being influenced by lake water. So we moved that site up the creek, which actually happened to be above the Presley Ranch. So when we started investigating this in 2008, we looked at the water quality in Blue Cypress Creek and it looked great, but it was because we had no local influence of biosolids. So that's part of the reason that one is kind of unusual. When we start putting all of this together, we start to see some patterns. In this graph, I'm showing cumulative biosolids applied. So this is over all of our database from 98, in some cases on, and the high flow phosphorus. So what this is saying is not ambient water, low flow. When you have storm events and high flow, what's coming off that land? And what we see is that essentially the more biosolids applied, the higher we see the storm flow phosphorus in those tributaries. There's a couple things to pull out of this. Low applications of biosolids seem to be possibly, they can be assimilated through plant uptake or sequestration or something like that. But there appears to be there may be a saturation point at which time phosphorus starts to be exported. And again, this jibes with Dr. Janicki's data of the phosphorus budget in the lake. I should go back. One of the criticisms we had at the Technical Advisory Committee was that this was total phosphorus and not phosphate. However, we've gone back and looked at this. I'm not showing it here, but we see the same patterns for phosphate. So what seems to be flushed out at high applications is highly mobile, very assimilable phosphorus for subsequent algal growth. Interestingly, and again, Dr. Janicki talked about this, while we see phosphorus going up, we don't see total nitrogen going up or color going up. So that's interesting. So we know we're putting a lot of phosphorus or a lot of nitrogen out there, but we don't necessarily see it in the receiving water bodies. And we don't see any significant increase for nitrate as well. What we think may be happening is by putting on biosolids, you're creating a great environment in the soil for denitrification. So whereas phosphorus sticks around, nitrogen can actually be denitrified and returned to the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. So you're providing the soils with great material for denitrification, lots of organic carbon, probably making it anoxic, which promotes denitrification. So we may actually be increasing denitrification and in part at least possibly addressing excess nitrogen. So that's one piece of potentially good news here. In 2017, we started a partnership with, well, before that, but in 2017, we were talking with the Department of Environmental Protection, and we decided we really needed to hone in on this. So far, we'd been doing ambient water quality analysis with just our typical grab samples. What we instituted was an intensified data collection program to try and get at this biosolids issue as well as we could at the time. And one of the things we looked at was a watershed with varying amounts of biosolids application. We chose the Jane Green watershed, and we looked at sub-watersheds that had various amounts of biosolids application. And what we see, again, on the left side is the more biosolids you apply cumulatively, the higher the phosphorus concentration. So when you take a watershed that the land use is pretty similar, the terrain, the geology is pretty similar, you try to constrain those effects, we still see an effect of cumulative biosolids application on water quality. Another thing that we did to, in terms of intensified sampling is we identified paired watersheds. This is rather hard to do, so we couldn't find a lot of them, but essentially you take two watersheds that are as similar as you can find, as close as you can find. Similar land use patterns, similar management, soils, etc. And we found two sites, one in the vicinity of Crescent Lake and one in the vicinity of Umatilla. One of these watersheds had biosolids applied, one did not. And you can see in the graphs on the right side the comparison in the stream concentration of total phosphorus in milligrams per liter between the biosolid watershed and the background watershed. Pretty dramatic difference. And most of that difference is the phosphate. So pretty apparent difference between those paired watersheds. And again, when we look at those paired watersheds, we see some other interesting differences. Biological oxygen demand, that's how much carbon is coming off of those that the bugs like to eat. There's more coming off the biosolids watershed. But similarly, we don't see increases in nitrogen. And total carbon was not significantly different. So I think, again, that points to the fact that denitrification is being enhanced potentially in those biosolids fields. What we've embarked on in the last 6 months or so is yet some additionally intensified sampling. One of the things that we've done is put a auto sampler that's specific for phosphate out. This is at the branch of Paget Creek, and because we were interested in real-time data, so could we tie stream flows and precipitation events to phosphate? And in fact, you can see that we were relatively dry latter part of, or mid part of May. Rain kicked up, and middle of May, you could see that phosphate levels went from a low of around 0.1 to 0.4. So as soon as it started raining, we started seeing very elevated levels of phosphate. So again, observational, but fairly telling, I think. Recent results we've gotten, we've gone out to the Presley Ranch. We sampled every single one of his permitted fields. I think he has 23 permitted fields. And one of the things we did was look at the soil phosphorus capacity index. This is not the P index that's used in the rules for the permits. This is something that potentially we'd like to move toward if and when rulemaking and permitting is revised. So essentially this takes the soil, looks at aluminum and iron, things that can hold on to the phosphorus, and says how much capacity does that soil have. When we use that capacity index on the Presley Ranch, we can see that a lot of those fields no longer have any phosphorus binding capacity. So numbers below 0 mean that there's no capacity left. Numbers above 0 mean that there is capacity for phosphorus. So many of those fields look to be essentially saturated with phosphorus. I don't show it here, but we also got tissue results back from IFAS for those same fields. Tissues are well above levels where phosphorus fertilization would be recommended. So it looks like things are quite adequate in terms of phosphorus out at the Presley Ranch. We're also doing stormwater sampling in the vicinity of the Presley Ranch. We've managed to get 2 storm events sampled. One was a grab sample where we had staff out there in the rain picking water up, and another was an auto sampler event. In both of these events, if you look at the nutrient data in the table, those numbers are very, very high. So we see total phosphorus numbers in excess of 1 milligram per liter, total nitrogen levels as high as almost 9 milligrams per liter. So this is water coming off of those fields that is very, very rich in nitrogen and phosphorus. The auto sampler that we have is going to stay there. We're waiting for 4 or 5 more events to get a handle on that. And we are also continuing to collect grab samples during events. We're just waiting for it to rain. The problem with this work is that the weather never cooperates. So one of the other things that we are doing with those storm samples is we're looking at tracers. We've run a couple of different suites of those tracers. And let me go back. So we worked with DEP on a limited set of tracers, and I'll show those results in a second. We've also, we're grabbing samples to send to a lab in Canada, I believe, that does an expanded list of tracers. So we're also pursuing that work. One of the other things that we've engaged in that we're working with IFAS, we're looking at soil pore water. So this is water under the field. It's been we've talked about it here. The permitting doesn't talk about groundwater. It only talks about surface water. So we're curious about what is happening in the groundwater. Are we seeing these nutrients and tracers getting into the groundwater that is subsequently flushed out into base flow and canals and streams? So just yesterday, our staff and IFAS were out installing these piezometers. You see 5 sites here. We put 3 wells in each site. Those are going to stay in for probably 6 months or so we can get a couple, probably a wet season, dry season type comparison. And those are deployed in such a way that we're trying to get up gradient of the ranch and down gradient. So groundwater is hard to discern flow patterns, but hopefully we put these in the right place. In the first round of tracer analysis, we had a limited suite of tracers. We looked at Paget Branch, Blue Cypress Lake Middle, Blue Cypress Lake Southwest Shore near where Paget comes in, and a road culvert that collects discharge from the ranch. The only hit that we got was 1,4-dioxane, I believe. That's a tracer associated with cosmetics. So in that sampling, just one hit, no hits elsewhere for those range of tracers. So lines of evidence between biosolids and increased TP concentrations. Right now, all I've showed you pretty much is correlational data. It's hard to run in a controlled experiment here. So what we have largely is observational data and water quality responses. But what we do see is temporal congruence between biosolids applications and changes in ambient TP without any evidence of land use driven changes. No other known sources of P loading in those watersheds. There may be other antecedent fertilizer applications. We're unsure about that because there's not records going back very far. We see strong relationships between cumulative biosolids application and TP concentrations in the receiving water bodies. Phosphorus and organic carbon concentrations become decoupled, right? I talked about this earlier. In a wetland-driven system, you typically see phosphorus and organic carbon kind of change in concert. Those two things have become decoupled. So where the wetlands may have a contribution in some of these systems, but that seems to be less than it used to be. Our paired watershed changes in water quality are really strongly indicative of biosolids and phosphorus responses. And the N to P ratio, as Commissioner Solari pointed out, the N to P responses in ambient water quality and biosolids N to P seem to be coming together. So overall, in many of these water bodies, ambient nitrogen to phosphorus ratios seem to be going down. So what are the implications? The Upper Basin is a Class 1 water, currently used as a potable water source. Lake Washington, Melbourne's pulling water out. They're becoming interested in microcystis and algal blooms in general, taste and odor issues. And there's potential for algal blooms in other parts, especially the toxin-producing taxa like microcystis. We're also concerned about the downstream TMDL and BMAP implications. A lot of the downstream BMAPs were constructed with the assumption that the Upper Basin Flood Control Project would treat agricultural discharge to an acceptable level. That may not be true anymore. And finally, the impacts to the water quality and the habitat conditions threaten everything we've done in the Upper Basin. We've got well in excess of $250 million of money put into restoration efforts, flood control efforts, and various things in the Upper Basin. So we see a threat to that. And that is all I have for you.
I'd like to build on the last thing you said, the $250 million project. I mean, that seemed in Indian River County start in the late 70s, early 80s, and St. John's, as it was developing, it's basically, as I understand, the protection of the Upper Basin, started buying lots of land. St. John's now owns roughly 25% of the land in Indian River County, and that's where that $250 million project is so long, so big. And one, I would have said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I would have thought that, I don't know what total acreage that is, but when you add that incredible acreage, go through the expense that St. John's put to build it, couple it with the fact that one of the biggest agricultural areas in the county would have been the St. John's Water Control District, now Improvement District, which now has half the agriculture it had, say, in the 80s when you were starting that. I would have thought that the water quality would have, by now, improved significantly. So that's just one of those things. Then you go a little more forward, and you have, again, the biosolids problem, which is, again, people say it's okay to put this on what they call as farmland, but one of the things that's happened is that there's an economic disconnect. I mean, again, no farmers would pay to have excess nutrients put on their land. They just wouldn't, and certainly citrus farmers couldn't afford that, period, today. But because the biosolids either has no cost or actually is a profit center, I'm not sure which, and the information doesn't seem to be readily available, they focused on the N-based part of it. And again, everything that you showed today is consistent with an N-based program, but the phosphorus just comes along and as a sort of bad hitchhiker along there and ends up causing these huge problems. But again, if the best management practices, which were really done in a commercial arena, you wouldn't have this problem, but because it's not. And then the last thing, you had the slide that showed, if I got it right, that the Indian River Lagoon had about 1 biosolids area where it was applied, and the upper basin 14. And that's telling. I mean, I just imagine what would happen in this community if, say, 1 mile from the lagoon, say the Riamar Golf Club, you had dump truck after dump truck dumping 12 to 24 inches of biosolids on the fields that close to the lagoon. I mean, we all know what would happen. I mean, it'd be a revolution. I mean, you mentioned, I think it was 2016 when St. John's became more aware of the problem. And for me, I read about it in an article, Orlando Sentinel article last summer. I mean, I was, basically asleep at the wheel with it. But I certainly wouldn't have been it if, the 24 inches or whatever was being dumped in the Riamar Country Club. So again, I mean, all this stuff seems to just speak up to something that's not being addressed properly. Again, like Commissioner O'Brien, I'm not faulting the landowners. They're doing what they're supposedly being told, but there certainly seems to be a regulatory disconnect here, where I would have thought that a lot of people in some of the regulatory agencies would have known a heck of a lot more than I did about biosolids, and still know a heck of a lot more about biosolids, but based on everything I know, I consider it to be the dumping of biosolids out by the Blue Cypress Lake absolutely insane, especially when, I don't know if you have the average, does St. John's River Water Management District have an average of how much it costs to remove a pound of nitrogen or phosphorus when it actually gets into the waters?
We actually look at that pretty carefully. A lot of our pay-for-performance projects, average estimates are 400 to in the thousands per pound of phosphorus removed.
Into the thousands. I saw one number was like $5,000. And the cost to prevent a bad thing from happening seems to me to be significantly less. And again, from a local government person, we've got a huge problem with the Indian River Lagoon, which is going to cost us well over $100 million over the next 10 years. We've already spent well over $50 million on it. We literally, in a low-density community, can't afford another $100 million project. We can't pay for it. And so again, some of my frustration is that you go to some of these regulatory meetings and you hear people talk about biosolids as if it's not really a crisis. And for me, this is absolutely a crisis. And again, I feel sorry for our utility department, where the wastewater treatment facility, the agency changed a permit and told us that the 697 or so pounds of phosphorus that we were dumping in 8 miles from the lagoon was a terrible problem, and we had to change our methodology at great cost to get it down to 197 pounds of phosphorus, while 293,000 pounds of phosphorus is being dumped 1 mile from the Blue Cypress Lake. I'm going off. I'm sorry. Let me just thank you for your presentation. And at this point, so I can calm down a little bit, and in lieu of lunch, we'll take a 10-minute break.
I just have a quick question.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
And Doctor, I realize this is a policy question, so you probably may not want to go down that road, but have you presented this to the board of St. John's yet? And if so, have they kind of said, yeah, this is terrible, we should ban this stuff, or have they taken a position yet?
We have not presented this explicitly to the board, primarily because we do not have a regulatory role in this particular issue. Our position is that we've been assisting the department and DACS to the greatest extent we can, giving them the information that we have and helping them explore scientific avenues.
And again, I don't want to put you on too big of a spot, but if the county makes it a legislative priority that we would like to get the state to ban the application of biosolids in the upper St. John's Basin, do you think your board would be supportive of our legislative position?
I don't want to speak for my board.
Abby will probably answer that. We'll get her later. Okay, I know it's a policy question, so.
Any other questions for Dean at this time before we break?
Doc, thank you for the presentation. I don't know if we were supposed to fully understand this presentation because you cautioned us it was full and robust with a lot of material. Unfortunately, I did understand it, and it was stellar. I'm going to rewatch it again and probably again. It was very thorough, and I appreciate what you've done up to this point. I think you have identified that in theory there are regulations, and in practice there are not. And that's what I got out of this after all of the facts and figures that came out and identification, and that something has to be done. I also believe that the landowners are unwitting victims, not participants. And they were not given the full and robust information, and they were probably led to believe that this was okay, this was customary, and this was, we regulate, we watch, and it's okay. And I think that's my takeaway from that, plus the fact of all the information that you've given. I will do a reread too, and I truly appreciate that. And I just wanted to thank you because it was thoroughly understandable.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll take a 10-minute break. The December 11th meeting of the Board of County Commissioners, we broke off in an exciting portion of the discussion on biosolids. I'd like to thank Vinny and his guests for the good presentation they gave us. And Vinny, I take it you're done for the present?
Yeah, I think we have some other folks here.
I'll be happy to open up to public comment and invite people to come to either one of the two podiums. Good morning. Name and address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Edie Witter. I'm the CEO and Senior Scientist of the Ocean Research and Conservation Association. So I wanted to share a little data with you that we've gotten from Blue Cypress Lake, but I first wanted to start off by commending you all on this investigation, because I think that it extends far, far beyond what's going on at Blue Cypress Lake. The biosolids issue is a very serious one, but this is a fascinating case study because it's one of the few examples where we just have so few other possibilities of where the pollution could be coming from. So, you know, we had a big blue-green algae bloom in Lake Okeechobee this summer, and we've had blue-green algae blooms in the Caloosahatchee River and the St. Lucie Estuary. The public is up in arms about this. It's affecting human health, and it's affecting our economy in a big way. And in looking at potential sources for what's driving these algae blooms, I think biosolids is something we need to be looking at pretty closely. Blue Cypress Lake has no connection whatsoever to Lake Okeechobee. And in fact, it has virtually nothing around it except the little fish camp on the western shore. So the biosolids that have been being brought up largely from Broward County and spread on Presley Ranch, and it's important to note that this is completely legal. I think it's really important that we not vilify the ranchers for this. They are doing this according to regulation. It does, however, seem like a lot of biosolids. Since Presley Ranch got permitted in 2013, they've spread 22,338 total dry tons of biosolids on the land. And this year, we had the biggest blue-green algae bloom that anybody's ever seen in Blue Cypress Lake, with very high concentrations of toxin. We got a sample right from the center of the initial bloom, which registered 4,700 parts per billion of microcystin. The World Health Organization sets the limit in drinking water at 1 part per billion, and the recreational exposure to 10 parts per billion. This was 4,700 parts per billion. So you've seen this data in a couple of different forms already. This is actually Lake Watch data collected between 2003 and 2018, looking at the average nitrogen levels in the lake, and you can see that they actually are trending downward. However, if you look at the phosphorus, total phosphorus in the lake, they were trending downward between 2003 and 2006, and then abruptly started upward in 2007 and have been steadily climbing since right up until what it is at 2018. This is pretty much what you'd expect if the biosolids are the source of it, because They are calculating, as Commissioner Solari and Commissioner O'Brien said, for the nitrogen load. Nitrogen load should actually be dropping partly because of denitrification and partly because of sequestration of the nitrogen in the algae blooms. But the phosphorus has been steadily climbing because they aren't calculating for that. So if you look at the permit map that EPA has for Presley Ranch and overlay that on Google Earth, you'll see that the property plots that are allowed for dumping run pretty close to the St. John's Marsh. And so the marsh itself is classified as Class 1 waters. And it's important to understand how quickly water can move through a marshland. So we were trying to figure out, where we could get the best estimate of what was going on with the least opportunity for contamination from Middleton. And so we picked Mudfish Slough, which is a creek that flows into the lake. So all of the water in the Blue Cypress Lake is at the headwaters of the St. John's, and it's an unusual river in that it flows north. And so the water trend out of the marshland is toward the lake. Just to give you an idea of how quickly water can move through marshland, this was a study down west of Miami in 2014, where they were looking at how water moved through the marshland, and they put fluorescein dye in that pocket of water that you see there close up on the left, and then you see it further away on the right. And in 45 minutes, it had moved a considerable distance, and they tracked it over a matter of hours, traveling very long distances. The distance between where the biosolids are applied and Mudfish Slough is very reasonable given the timelines that we found. So looking at the timeline of what was going on at Blue Cypress Lake, the dumping that went on at Presley Ranch this year took place between March 12th and May 5th. During that time, they received 1,378,922 dry pounds of biosolids that were spread on their land. The rains came in mid-May, and just in May alone, we received 7.65 inches of rain. And then it was in June that the microcystis bloom occurred, and where we measured the 4,700 parts per billion. Now, we sampled right in the thick of the worst part of the bloom because we wanted to know what the worst case scenario was. But that bloom then dissipated throughout the lake, and when we went back out there, we saw it as streaks. And if we just took a hand sample just about anywhere, even there, after it had been dissipated, we were still talking about 19 parts per billion of microcystin, which is still above the World Health Organization limit for recreational exposure at 10 parts per billion. So we were looking for possible biomarkers at that coming out of Mudfish Slough, and so we put out sediment traps, and these are floating traps that dangle 25 centimeters below the surface of the water. We leave them out for a week and then collect them. And so relative to that timeline, this is what we were seeing. First of all, the blue bar represents sucralose, which is just an artificial sweetener like Splenda, and the red bar represents acetaminophen, which is essentially Tylenol. And so in the May sediment trap, we found the sucralose, or Splenda, but no acetaminophen. In August, now we got the Tylenol, but no Splenda. And then by October, we were seeing neither. So if you look at that, the Splenda, interestingly, came out just before the rains started. The Tylenol we were finding just in August, and then everything seemed to be gone by October. So to understand what this data means, you need to know about the half-life of these biomarkers. This is from an EPA study where they show the half-life of sucralose as being over a year. In other words, this stuff stays around for a really long time. but acetaminophen or Tylenol is just a matter of weeks. So when you look at a wastewater treatment plant where these things come into the system, the majority of the sucralose ends up coming out in the reuse water with very little Tylenol, and the majority of the acetaminophen is pulled out of the water stream and goes into the biosolids. And so the data that we got where we saw that first pulse of the sucralose, the artificial sweetener, makes sense because biosolids aren't dry. In fact, you can see the steam coming off them. It's cake because there's moisture mixed into with it. So there would be a pulse of liquid that came out of that when it was first applied. And that's what we saw with that initial pulse of the sucralose. So if you look at this in this table, it's just a repeat of the same data, but you're seeing that the sucralose comes out first, then you don't see any more of it because it was just the liquid that was available initially. Acetaminophen has been shown in a number of scientific studies has a delayed for coming out of biosolids because it's bound up, but then it's released. But then it's got a half-life of just weeks, so the fact that there's nothing by October is not surprising at all. It's exactly what you would see. We also looked at how long microcystin stays in the food web. One of the fishermen out there brought us a couple of bluegills that he had collected right in the middle of the bloom, and we found high levels of microcystin in the fillets and even higher in the liver. And if you do the calculations, even at the lowest of the two fish, the toxin load in one serving of bluegill was almost twice what the World Health Organization sets as a daily dose limit. So it wouldn't kill you, but it probably wouldn't be very good for your liver. Yeah.
Edie, can you go back to the chart of the different tracers and their half-lives?
Yeah. So,
No, keep going back.
okay, the DEP chart?
Yeah, there.
Yeah.
All right, so I think some of those other tracers, the carbamazepine and the primidone, I think, weren't those on your list of tracers?
They were, but they were just taking hand samples, one sample.
Right, no, I get that, but my point is they have very short half-lives as well.
You are correct.
So,
yes, fair point.
So my concern is DEP gave us this approved list of tracers to look for that have a very short half-life. So it's not surprising that we're not finding those here 6 months after the rain event.
Yeah, very good point. And so then we got a bit of funding that allowed us to go back out in November and caught 33 fish with the help of one of the local fishermen and retested for microcystin in the fillets, shown in blue, and in the liver, shown in orange. Don't ever eat the liver of a fish. But the good news is that the numbers have dropped a lot. So there's those bluegills, you'll see the number of fish caught is in white on the bottom below the graph. We caught 12 bluegills and found microcystin in none of them, as compared to the very high levels we found at the time in June when the first two were collected. Those animals or fish that did show higher levels of microcystin, tilapia was the highest, and then catfish. So these are all algae eaters. So it kind of makes sense that they would be the ones that accumulated the toxin. But even so, all of these toxin levels are below the World Health Organization concern level. Personally, I wouldn't eat them, but you're probably safe to do so. So there's two possible interpretations. One is that the toxin load is actually diminishing in the fish themselves over time, or that the fish that had the high toxin loads have died. And this is what we have left. The fisherman that took us out for this fishing trip was surprised at the low catch rate he was getting at some of his favorite fishing holes. But we all know fishermen have different versions of the truth. So I did ask one of the other local fishermen out there, and he said he hasn't seen what he considers a significant drop in the fish as yet. But of course, one of the concerns besides the human health concern is the possible impact on the ospreys, because this is a very visible site. It is the highest concentration of ospreys anywhere in the world. And so if this microcystin ends up having an impact on them, it's going to be a very public and embarrassing situation. However, fortunately, the ospreys migrate to South America, and those that migrated did so before the bloom started. So if the microcystin has dropped to the degree that it seems to have, we may still be okay as long as the moratorium is kept in place. But I do agree with the statements made here that I think we have a regulatory disconnect, and that this is a problem that extends well beyond Blue Cypress Lake and is impacting our state as a whole and needs some forward thinking in order to address these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak today? Come on up to the podium, please. Name and address to the record.
Hello, my name is Mark Yano, and I reside at 10014 4th Street. Let me just make a comment on what Dr. Witter just said. As a professional fisherman, I will say that fish do move around. So another possibility might be that these fish migrated to Farm 13 or one of the other areas outside the lake. As many of you know, I am a former biologist with the state of Florida and the federal government. I have been in contact with individuals in St. Lucie County regarding a lawsuit that Sunbreak Farms has filed against the county regarding their moratorium on biosolids. I urge Indian River County to support St. Lucie County in their defense, because if St. Lucie County loses this suit, it will set a precedent and make it significantly more difficult for our county to keep biosolids from being dumped here. At the recent Tri-County Commission meeting, it was unanimously agreed to keep biosolids from all 3 counties. It should be noted that at this meeting, it was also indicated that the state was likely to move slowly on revising their biosolid rules. Commissioner Solari and others have presented some valuable information today that I sincerely hope is coordinated with St. Lucie County to support their defense. While biosolids deposition is a great concern to our area, there is a broader issue that is at the root of keeping the waters of Indian River County clean and healthy. Nutrient pollution is the 800-pound gorilla in the room that no one wants to seriously acknowledge. Nutrients cause algae blooms that kill off seagrass in the lagoon, but also cause toxic algae blooms, as seen on Blue Cypress Lake, the St. Lucie and Caloosahatchee rivers, and with red tide outbreaks. We got a small taste of red tide a short time ago, and 200,000 pounds of dead fish were removed from Indian River County beaches alone. Lake Blue Cypress toxic algae blooms and this small red tide event are a harbinger of things to come if we do not seriously reduce nutrients in Indian River County. My dad lives in Sarasota, where red tide blooms have been escalating for years. I talk with him every week, and I assure you the media has been downplaying the situation. It is tantamount to an apocalypse over there and has now flared up again. The economic impacts associated with this red tide have been devastating local businesses, and some are now in danger of bankruptcy. I will address nutrients in Indian River County's waters at a later date. Thank you, Commissioners.
Thanks. And I just want to say, I don't believe that nutrients is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that it's not being discussed in Indian River County. As soon as we heard about this problem, we made it very public. We continue to make it very public, which I think today is a good example of. I'll also note that a number of us went up to the most recent Florida Association of Counties conference a couple weeks ago, and we got them to put the issue of biosolids on their radar, so that they'll be supportive as we go forward. and importantly, the Florida Association of Counties also is now in the process of setting up a water policy committee for the first time. So not only are we aware of it in Indian River County, the Tri-County area, as you saw, but the Florida Association of Counties as a whole. And I also know that our Representative Grawl, is very active in water, and she's going to be proposing something at the state legislature. So, and I think by the time and attention that St. Johns River Water Management District has been paying for this, also is acknowledgement of that. So again, I mean, there's nothing unrecognized here. We all recognize that nutrients are a problem, but we also recognize and understand that they are necessary. What again happens is that sometimes when there's an economic disconnect, people behave badly. Sometimes when people don't understand the problem, they behave badly, and sometimes people are just careless. So through a number of paths, which I believe this board is totally behind and has been for a number of years, we will make progress. And just so the public understands, one of the reasons why we have this particular nutrient problem with the biosolids today is because communities to the south got certain legislation passed which basically would effectively stops them from putting biosolids in the communities where they're manufactured, in Miami-Dade, Broward particularly. So what's happened is they're exporting their biosolids to some of the closest places like Indian River County, which is giving us the problem. And again, I want to point out to the residents in Indian River County, none of these biosolids are being produced by Indian River County residents. We treat them and then put what's left over in the landfill. So again, this is exported to Indian River County from counties who are basically following new state statutes.
Yes, I understand that.
And I just wanted the audience to be clear
Right.
on that because it's a difficult subject.
And my comment was not directed at Indian River County regarding the 800-pound gorilla. I realize you guys are aware of the issue. And I do commend you for, Commissioner Solari, for your looking into this biosolids matter. You've taken a personal interest in it, and you've got a lot of information. And again, I certainly hope that our county supports St. Lucie County in their efforts, because it is believed by St. Lucie County that if they lose this lawsuit, it's going to set a precedent. So there was a lot of great information presented here today. I'm going to encourage St. Lucie County to look at the video from these proceedings. And again, thank you.
And thank you for coming today. Ma'am, come on up. Name and address for the record, please.
My name's Jean Cashpole. I live at 526 Fiddlewood Road, Vero Beach. I'm here today to represent the Indian River Neighborhood Association and just give you our position, and also as a concerned citizen. First, the Indian River Neighborhood Association would like to thank you for the politically courageous 6-month moratorium on biosolids dumping in our county. We know there were concerns about going against the Department of Agricultural legally permitted practice. We also appreciate the cooperation of the local ranchers who worked with the county to comply with the ban. Since the original ban, further testing has revealed the serious consequences of biosolids dumping near Blue Cypress Lake, especially the increase of phosphorus and the unknown long-term human health effects of the toxin microcystin. For once, we encourage a government entity, in this case you, to kick the can down the road and extend the moratorium and hope that the new administration in Tallahassee will convince the DEP to ultimately ban the land application of biosolids permanently. The IRNA will actively petition our representatives and new governor to do just that for the benefit of our waters and our health, and we invite all Indian River County residents to join us in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else from the public wish to speak today? Name and address for the record, please.
My name is Russell Herman, 586 Redwood Court, Sebastian. I apologize for my laryngitis. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here today representing the Friends of St. Sebastian River. In 2016, the Indian River Lagoon Economic Evaluation Update stated the annual economic value of the Indian River Lagoon was over $7,600,000,000. Biosolid runoffs are being deposited where they are able to mitigate into the St. Sebastian River, ultimately into the Indian River Lagoon, significantly contributing to eutrophication. The detrimental effects are often largely out of sight, hidden below our water's surface. The results: enhanced destruction. Algae blooms block sunlight, which is needed to sustain life there. Sunlight is essential to sustain the health and balance of life in our river and estuaries. Algae, in the right amount, is very much needed and natural, of course, but algae is an aggressive growth competitor. Biosolids contribute significantly to giving algae an upper hand because it doesn't need to be rooted to the riverbed or the lagoon bottom like grasses do. Algae thrives freely, unrooted, often suspended in the water column or attached to grass. Compare eutrophication to laying plywood over a lush green residential lawn. What lies under the blank, deprived of sunlight, no photosynthesis, eventually dies, taking every living thing dependent on it out of the picture. In 2013, the Florida Department of Environmental Protection indicated that the Indian River County ranks as the third highest county in the state of Florida for the amount of acreage receiving land applications of biosolids. Furthermore, a quick analysis of these same figures shows that the Indian River County was receiving 12.74% of all biosolids applied to the land in Florida. This amounted to 12,470 dry tons. Indian River County's department takes its own dewatered biosolids to the landfill. Indian River County does not spread dewatered waste on land within the county. If Indian River County is disposing of the waste in the landfill because they think it is prudent and the right thing to do for our county, then why? Why would we bring waste to spread it on our land? Remember that $7,600,000,000 is the lagoon's economic value. Do you want to gamble and possibly lose this value? Please ban biosolids in our county. Stop the destructive trickle of this product in our waters. It is a significant step to cleaning up our waters, and it is the right thing to do. Thank you very much for your consideration of this matter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Name and address for the record, please.
Yeah, I'm Richard Baker, President of the Pelican Island Audubon Society, and I would like to thank ORCA for coming up with the original testing to show that there is a problem, and we should give a real strong vote of thanks to Edie Witter and her organization for getting out there ahead of the governmental agencies and finding out that there was a problem. And even when you saw these horrible, horrible pictures of the algae out there, it was quite a delayed process. We should also give some thanks to the St. John's Water Management District. 8 years ago, they went out and bought all kinds of lands around Indian River County, as you mentioned earlier. They have 25% of the land is in conservation. But all along the whole upper basin, they've purchased lands, and we're much ahead of the place. You see, South Florida Water Management District can't seem to get their act together to get the South Florida and the Everglades put together, but St. John's did. They were really a forward-thinking back eight years ago. And so I'm glad to see that they're stepping up now to start doing this testing. Audubon actually has been monitoring the ospreys out there for the last 3 years, and the population is increasing. As mentioned, we have probably the largest population in the world. That is something. We counted 340 active nests out there last year. We're going to be monitoring again this year. But one thing we have been noticing is that the birds are not collecting their fish at Blue Cypress Lake, but they're going up to the stick marsh to get their fish. Maybe the ospreys know a little something. Another thing that was pointed out from the data is that the ospreys are coming, or some of them are down in South America, but they're coming up in November. They get really serious in January and February of putting in their nests. They try to get done by June before the hurricanes and the strong weather. They migrate out of the area, so they might be bypassing the worst of the contaminated fish there. So, but I think we should give Edie Witter a great round of applause for all the great work that they've done in isolating that. But it's not just Blue Cypress Lake either. It's the whole country that is affecting this. We have other ranches here. We just don't have a nice, pristine lake that's picking up all the bad things that are happening around there. It's going into the lagoon eventually here. So we need to be regionally, statewide, nationwide, and worldwide on how we handle our poop. I mean, we've got a real problem here. We've got too many people doing too many things. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Before I get back to the commissioner, I'll take a page from Dr. Baker's book. I would like to thank everybody for their presentations today. I'd specifically like to thank Vinny and his staff, and for the public. This is available on the website, and the staff report for this matter was exceptionally well done. There's a great timeline which shows the type of diligent work that's been done by the Utilities Department and their staff, and it actually makes good reading. I'd like to thank Mr. Lynch and Mr. Janicki for coming today. Your presentation was very helpful. I'd like to thank St. John's River Water Management District. Your help in this has been tremendous, and the interest you've shown in correcting the problem, I think is not only commendable, but it's nice to actually be working with the regulatory agency. I'd like to thank Edie Witter, and I'd like to thank all the citizens who are here today helping with this issue. It's all very much appreciated, and it's certainly, I think this issue is going to take some time, and it's certainly helpful to hear from the citizens of Indian River County. I understand that because this is so far to the west of the county, where there are so few people, that it doesn't get the same type of attention that the lagoon gets, where so many of us, like myself, drive back and forth over the lagoon and look at it every day. But it is, I believe, just as essential to the well-being of Indian River County that we work hard to address this issue and do it in the right way. So with that said, Commissioner Fleischer.
Mr. Chairman, after this brief discussion we've had here today and presentation, and looking at the options that staff has outlined, it appears that staff recommendation of option number 4 is probably the most appropriate, as it affords the opportunity to continue the moratorium, and it provides for a public meeting on, I believe, January 8th that we would hold for the continuance of the moratorium, and furtherance of regulatory discussion, as well as a furtherance of options, and an ordinance looking at the loads that are established and dispersed in our county. So with that, I would move staff recommendation option number 4.
Which does include the emergency order request through
Yes.
the DEP.
Okay. I would say we hold off on the emergency order. Couple reasons. One is it's only a 90-day window. And then the qualifications to renew it greatly limit the fact. So I think I'd rather save that in our pocket in case we need it. I think we can extend our moratorium. We can ask DEP to extend their moratorium. and we can ask Fellsmere to extend their moratorium. And given the fact that the Presleys have indicated their willingness not to apply biosolids during 2019, I think that should be sufficient protection. And then if something comes up, another ranch or something else, then we would ask DEP for the emergency order. But given it's only 90 days and very limited renewal options, I'd rather ask them first to extend their moratorium and then save the emergency order in case we need it.
Well, the emergency order catches a lot more attention.
Right, but is it needed right now with the Presleys indicating that they're not going to apply biosolids? And basically, it's a one-shot 90-day window with very limited renewal options.
And I appreciate the Presleys volunteering, stepping up to the plate, bearing in mind and looking at a full year. That's why I wanted to propose option 4. But I believe that we're going to keep your powder dry.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, so if the Presleys say they're not going to apply, what is the emergency? What's our justification to DEP?
Commissioner, you could always hold off on that second part of
Yeah.
the DEP order until we confirm one way or the other whether the Presleys
Right.
mean the full year in 2019.
And I think
Firm
we've
handshake.
given enough information to DEP that they should be willing to extend their moratorium as well.
But just quick, Jason, you felt that that was the word that you got direct? That it was 2019?
To clarify, Mr. Presley said that he did not intend to spread any biosolids this season, so I don't know if that's a full calendar year 2019. We had said this year. I will say during the wet season, I think there are permit conditions that would prevent them from applying biosolids after the end of the next 6-month extension. But there may be a time period beyond that biosolids could be applied. So I don't want to mischaracterize what Mr.
Right.
Presley told me. It was this season, this year got said, so I don't know that that's a full commitment until December 31st, 2019. It would be throughout the 6-month moratorium process, and I would say practically throughout the wet season where they would not be able to apply. I'm not clear that he was saying throughout all of 2019, so I just want to clarify that.
Counselor?
Maybe as kind of a compromise, maybe staff get the ability to pursue the emergency order if and when we feel that's the
Yes.
appropriate time, so that it's kind of, we know that's in our quiver of arrows. It's one things we can pull out if and when, but not right now. Understanding Commissioner O'Brien's really good point on right now doesn't really help us, but a couple months from now, if it becomes apparent that we really need that trigger, we've got the direction to move forward to pursue that. It was just attempt to compromise the position.
Well, Counselor, I'm sure that the chairman would have no hesitation to call a special call meeting on a moment's notice, so I think we can keep our powder completely dry. Is that correct? So if that's the case, then we can hold off on that. Mr. Presley has been honorable up to this point, giving full and unferreted access to his property for identification, according to many of the individuals here in the room. So I think he's been very cooperative, and I believe that his intention is probably for the rest of the year, but let's see if we can identify that. But my recommendation still stands.
And I'd just like you, if you would, to consider including in your motion the 18 whereases in the ordinance proposed.
Yes.
I believe those whereases are very important. I'd be happy to read them all right now, but I'll pass.
You can read them if you wish there. I know
I'll
that
read
you
4,
like to.
if I could, but ask you to include all 18 in your motion. I'll just read the 4 that begin. Whereas in 2018, there were microcystis blooms in Blue Cypress Lake, and whereas Jones Edmond Associates analyzing historic St. Johns River Water Management District data has identified a relationship between the increase in land-applied biosolids in the Blue Cypress Lake watershed and an increase in the phosphorus levels in the Blue Cypress Lake. And whereas on November 19, 2018, at the Florida Department of Environmental Protection TAC, the St. Johns River Water Management District staff presented information that showed a clear correlation of increased phosphorus levels where land-applied biosolids were spread at FDEP permitted sites within the upper St. Johns River Basin, and whereas the land application of biosolids has been restricted in neighboring counties and ecosystems to the south, such as the St. Lucie River watershed and the Lake Okeechobee watershed, leaving Blue Cypress Lake and the St. Johns River watershed as the cheapest alternative for the disposal and the land application of Class B biosolids generated in South Florida. I believe those are particularly important, but all 18 matter, and I just feel be able to rest more easy tonight if they were included in your motion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to include them. I don't think it won your vote. I think we had your full support on every movement of this action, but it made it titanium, and so moved.
Thank you. We have a motion from Commissioner Flesher.
Chairman?
Yes.
Question and maybe something else to possibly add. With Blue Cypress Creek running west of the lake within a few miles, it changes to Osceola County and it runs for many, many miles west of there, is sharing all the same data with our Osceola County counterparts equivalent. I don't know if everything's run through their utilities like ours is here, but just to let them know what we're doing and to maybe consider some similar actions in their county if they have these same types of operations that may be feeding in through Blue Cypress Creek.
So basically, you'd like our staff to pass a good amount of information back to Osceola County. Is it okay to go through the utility departments?
Or I don't know if this type of operation is run through their utilities, or do they have an environmental department? I don't know their.
So just ask the county administrator to try to find the most appropriate person in Osceola County to direct the information to and see that it's done, and ask for their cooperation as we move forward, and suggest that we keep on communicating together as we go forward.
Super.
That part of your motion? Good. I'll be happy.
And is this for, he had said option 4, which is to pursue the emergency order. Are we now
I think
holding it in abeyance
We're
until?
pursuing the emergency order. We're authorizing the pursuit of the emergency order, but holding it in
Holding in
abeyance
abeyance.
until, and I think most
I'm not
probably,
gonna
we
pursue it
can.
and hold it in abeyance. To me, that's confusing.
Well, no, I mean, we allow for the pursuing of it, but at the appropriate moment.
You don't like that?
We can change that.
Well, if we're saying we're going to pursue it, then that means
No,
we're
we're
going to do it.
allowing for the pursuit of it at the appropriate
Okay,
moment.
well, that's different than
No,
pursuing
no,
it.
if I was inarticulate, I apologize. Did you have a question?
Authorize and hold in abeyance.
And would you be more comfortable if it came back before the Board of County Commissioners? Or would you be sufficient to just leave the decision with the county administrator?
No, I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I just think we should wait until we absolutely need it.
Fine.
And would your motion include requesting Fellsmere and DEP to extend their moratoriums?
Most certainly.
And that's exactly my second.
Yeah, there we go.
So, since the motion is now so big,
It is huge.
can we restate it for clarification?
Okay,
purposes?
so
Or maybe Dylan should restate, whoever wants to restate.
Made lots of notes.
I would be happy to
Counselor,
try,
did you
or
take
do you want to try?
copious notes, or
You've taken more notes, go ahead.
read off?
Mr. Ryan.
So I've got number 1, which is that we are going to work to extend the moratorium, and we will bring that back on January 8th. That will include the 18 whereas clauses that have been identified in the draft ordinance that was presented to you today. Number 3 is that we will have as an option of seeking the emergency order, but to hold that for now. 4, we will coordinate with Osceola County. And then 5, we are going to request DEP and Fellsmere to also extend their moratorium. Have I forgotten any of the items?
Thank you.
And for clarity's sake, the board wouldn't need to take action to pursue the emergency order if it was determined by staff.
Board would not need to take further action, is that the decision of the county administrator.
Okay.
It's an authorize and hold in abeyance for your discretion.
There's the motion and the second. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Thank you, everybody. And we will now move to county attorney matters, Bright Line construction and maintenance costs litigation. Mr. Rundle.
Thank you very much. About 5 years ago, Florida East Coast Railway and All Aboard Florida Operations LLC reached out to Indian River County requesting, actually, I'm just going to hold on a second. I know we got a bunch of people walking around.
Smart move.
We have such an astute audience out here.
It's amazing when they leave, you know, just before these exciting moments, but it happens.
Now for the good stuff. Oh. It is cool in here.
Mr. Reingold, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. About 5 years ago, Florida East Coast Railway and All Aboard Florida Operations LLC reached out to Indian River County requesting that the county execute amendments to the FECR County Highway Railroad Crossing Agreements. The proposed amendment would have made All Aboard Florida a third-party beneficiary to the one-sided FECR agreements. The Board of County Commissioners decided not to approve the amendment to the FECR crossing agreement. It has become clear that Brightline believes that they can force the county to pay for the installation and the maintenance of the safety improvements at the crossings that are needed for their project. I have met with Casey Walker with the law firm of Murphy & Walker. The firm has done a great job in representing the county in the past, both in the roof case and also in the FVP Miami Lakes case. Based upon his initial research, Mr. Walker believes that absent the amendments to the FECR agreements, Brightline cannot pass its railroad crossing maintenance and installation costs onto the county. And he recommends that the county seek to file an action for a declaratory judgment in court. Mr. Walker has presented a retainer agreement in which he would be paid $290 per hour, which is the same rate that was paid in the FVP case. County Attorney's Office recommends that the board authorize the county attorney to execute the retainer agreement and also to file the complaint for injunctive relief when it is ready. I'm here for any additional questions about the issue.
Any questions of Mr. Reingold? Anybody from the public wishes to speak on this issue? There being none?
Good staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion from Commissioner O'Brien for staff recommendation, second by Commissioner Adams. Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And that ends today's very exciting meeting. Hope everybody continues to enjoy the weather and enjoys the beginning of the holidays. There.